The Ratchet & Clank series is a special place in my heart. You know when you're a youngin' and you play what's essentially handed to you or is already lying around? The Ratchet & Clank games were some of the first games I went out of my way to buy all by myself like a big boy. I quite literally grew up with these games, from the PS2 to the 3 to the 4 to finally the 5 this past year. I know these games inside and out, and above that, they played a huge role in me getting into gaming and understanding what it is I find enjoyable in a game. Needless to say, this series is pretty meaningful for me. That being said, I don't know if I can call myself a Ratchet & Clank fan anymore. One can only watch for so long as their once beloved series publicly and viscerally dissolves piece by piece until only a garish facsimile remains. With every new entry, the Ratchet & Clank series has progressively lost more and more of its original character, charm, and overall quality. What was once a witty and novel sci-fi knockabout has been shaved down and had all its various parts replaced until it's become almost the exact opposite of its original vision. It's not even that it's unrecognizable now, it's that it's recognizable as the very kind of product the first games ridiculed. And just to be clear, when talking about this decline, I am talking about the whole series, not like the spin-off era that no one likes, or the PSP games that we all know are poo-poo, because if you step back and look at even the very first sequel, this has been a long time coming. So better pack a lunch, because we are going to be embarking on a whopper of a retrospective on the Ratchet & Clank series, to look back at what made the original games so memorable and what's been lost to diminishing returns over the past few decades. Before we get started, a couple things I want to mention. Firstly, although this video will talk all about the Ratchet games released on PS2, all of the footage you'll be seeing from older games will be from the PS3 HD ports, which, ain't ideal. These versions of the games, while still completely playable, have loads of obvious visual glitches and hiccups that either didn't exist in the originals or were appropriately covered up by the original aspect ratio, so you're gonna see some weird stuff, and I apologize for that. Blame the janky-ass ports and this terrible main menu. Who approved this? Additionally, if you were hoping to get through a nigh 3-hour Ratchet & Clank video without encountering a single spoiler for any Ratchet & Clank game, well, it sounds like you're the kind of person who's used to disappointment. But seriously, we're going to be going over every mainline Ratchet & Clank here, and of course that includes the game's plots. Oh heavens, so much plot. It is all up for grabs, so, tread carefully, if you dare. And on a final preface, let me make it clear that everything said in this video is just my opinion. You may disagree with me, and you know what? That's a beautiful fact of life. This is just my personal opinion on the Ratchet & Clank series, and a bunch of little things that I don't enjoy about every game individually. You disagree? Okay, this is my video though, so, listen up. Okay, let's just dive right in. Appropriately enough, where it all began. In 2002. The story of Ratchet & Clank begins right at the title screen. Ratchet's a little mechanic guy trying to build a ship so he can finally travel off the planet he's been stuck on, but turns out he's missing the last component he needs to get it running. Feels bad indeed. Meanwhile, a factory planets away is churning out warbots for use by an insidious business bloke named Chairman Drek, whose plan to build his people a new home involves tearing apart existing planets and stitching together a new one out of the planetary chunks and half-burnt corpses.
Unfortunately, this change in mass will cause your planet to spin out of control and drift into the sun, where it will explode into a flaming ball of gas, but of course, sacrifices must be made.
As fate would have it, however, the factory spits out a reject who we'll call Clank, for that's what they call him. With much nicer intentions than the rest of his kind, Clank discovers Drek's wicked plot and makes his escape, which results in him crash landing on Ratchet's planet. Clank wants to find someone who can stop Drek, Ratchet wants to travel off-world, and since Clank's got the missing piece to get Ratchet's ship running, the two set off on an adventure of galactic proportions. Something I've always really appreciated about the first Ratchet & Clank game is that it's actually a game about Ratchet & Clank and their relationship. Plenty of the game's contemporaries would involve a group of 2 or 3 friends, but it was never really a focus for them. It was always like, they've been friends forever, they'll stay friends, who cares? But in Ratchet & Clank, the relationship between the titular duo is front and center. This is literally the first time they're meeting.
Interesting.
We get to watch them bond and see their interactions evolve as they spend more time together and start to understand one another on a more personal level. Clank's quite naive and focused on doing right, almost to a fault, while Ratchet's a bit cocksure and self-interested. Of course he is, he's been stuck on a barren rock all his life and is raring to see all this glamorous galaxy life he's seen on TV. And Clank was literally born yesterday. This lends every interaction involving the two loads of character. The two of them react in different ways to every NPC they cross.
Actually, I build robots. I myself am not a robot guy, per se.
Nerd.
I like him.
When given the coordinates to a new planet via a little video played on an infobot, the two will have different takeaways from what they just saw.
Did you see that?
Yes, I hope that poor woman is all right.
She's fine, I think. I was talking about the hoverboard races.
They'll even argue if some planets are worth visiting when they both want different things. As friendly as they start out, as the story develops, the two characters' goals start pulling them in opposite directions. Self-interested as he is, Ratchet resents Clank when the little guy's focus on Drek gets them in a spot of trouble, and he wants to set out on matters of personal revenge. Meanwhile, Clank still got the best interests of the galaxy in mind and starts resenting Ratchet for being too stubborn to let go and focus on the real threat. But Ratchet can't travel without Clank, and Clank can't save the day without Ratchet's help, meaning they're effectively trapped together, for better and for worse. There are some points in this game in which the two are so vicious to each other, you almost wonder if they're gonna end this journey as friends.
We'll go just long enough to pick up the O2 mask.
Perhaps the extra oxygen will help your brain to function properly.
Yeah, and maybe the salt water will rust your mouth shut.
There's a moment in the ending, this catch-of-breath moment in which the day is won and Ratchet walks off alone. That's it. You can see it in Clank's face. It's over, isn't it? Each character got what they wanted, and now he's alone.
Hey, Tin Can!
Seeing Ratchet come back for Clank is not only narratively satisfying, but genuinely heartwarming. Thanks to Clank, Ratchet has gradually transformed from this abrasive, selfish gun nut to a more mature-minded fellow who finally thinks to look at what's happening outside his own personal bubble and lend a hand to help. They've been through so much, of course they're sticking together from here on out. Their friendship has so much weight and importance when they go through these trials and tribulations. And it's not like some super legendary storytelling or whatever. It's tropey buddy film stuff stapled onto a Star Wars, but it's handled about as well as it can be. The game really feels like two dudes on an adventure through a huge galaxy, learning and growing from one another. And that interpersonal drama makes for a great anchor the rest of the narrative can orbit around. Orbit. That's a space pun for all you space fans out there, and it does feel like a huge galaxy. Every time you go to a new level, you have to select the planet manually, and then you get treated to some cool flyby shots of making the trip. It's a disguised loading screen, yeah, but it makes things feel like one big adventure. You visit so many planets in this game, and each feels super unique with not only different architecture, color palettes, and an absolute banger of a backing soundtrack, but unique enemy types and friendly NPC characters that give you glimpses into the social ecosystems of every world. It's amazing what you can pack into just a 15-second interaction. But no matter where you go, some things never change, and that's change, if you know what I'm talking about. Cash! Moolah! The legalist of tender. Oh, you're saving the galaxy? Well, what's in it for me? It doesn't matter who you talk to or the circumstances, we all gotta be making that money.
How about I sell you these? At cost.
Sell? After we just saved your scrawny butt?
All right. I'll give you the employee discount too.
Themes of consumerism and self-absorption pump through every aspect of this game like blood through an animal. No matter where you go or what you do, you're gonna have to pay to progress. The best way to get money is by destroying everything around you, and then using that money to buy more weapons to destroy even more things. The cycle keeps going, and it's the omnipresent corporation benefiting from its own firearm economy. The main bad guy's motive is pure greed on this scale.
Who do you think polluted our last world? I did. You see, I've been paid for every square inch of my new world. Once the inhabitants move in, I will begin polluting this world as well. Then the whole thing starts all over again.
It's not the most profound stance ever taken by a sci-fi narrative, but it works with how all in the game is about making that point. Everyone's in it for the money, and don't act like you're any different. Look at all those weapons. You want them, don't you? Of course you do. And then you do buy a weapon, and you don't even get a full clip of ammo with it. That's how far we go in this game, full-on buy the charger separately. There's this real workman's sci-fi feel about the game that gives it a special gritty charm. For all the glitz and glam promised by the advertisements we see on the infobots, you get to the planet itself and it's so normal. You talk to the inhabitants and there's not even ambient music, just dry cinematography that lets the characters' larger-than-life personalities speak for themselves. And the people you come across are just dudes, employees and working-class chaps and chapettes who need to make ends meet. All the weapons are just hunks of metal bolted together. Hell, the money unit itself is bolts. It really feels like you're rooting around at the bottom of the food chain, just guys being dudes getting by on a system designed around personal gain. gives this game this snarky edge that sticks with you no matter where you go, and it turns the galaxy into a character in and of itself, while threading in nicely with the interpersonal conflict faced by the main duo, itself a conflict rooted in self-interest. Before they can save the galaxy, they need to learn to save each other. I'll bet you didn't expect me to have 4 whole paragraphs worth of talking on the narrative content on this baby baba jumping game, did you? All the themes of the story are present in every fractal, every interaction in detail in the atmosphere, and indeed every part of the gameplay. It makes everything about the game feel authentically realized and gives the game a strong sense of identity. And helps that the baby baba jumping part of the game is also really good. Gameplay-wise, Ratchet & Clank is a sort of 3D platformer hybrid, with an equal focus on exploration and firearm combat. You go from planet to planet with a new goal in mind for each one, destroying any enemies you come across, then using the bolts you gather along the way, you buy new weapons, or sometimes the way forward itself. The order in which you unlock said planets is somewhat linear, but only to an extent. See, you touch down on a planet and immediately you're faced with 2 or 3 ways you can go without an obvious, quote, right path, unquote. It's on you to just pick one and see where it might lead. It could lead you to your objective, maybe you'll discover something you'll need for later progression, or maybe it'll be a completely optional path leading you to a cool gizmo. There really is no way to know what you might find, which makes it really exciting to just explore. And then the paths will loop back to the start of the level, making everything feel interconnected like one big place. Oh, it's beautiful. And it gives a lot of agency to progression. You'll often have 2 planets available at once, and rarely is it clear which one's the main one. And because the branching paths themselves are so contained, you'll never be stuck for long if you just look at where you haven't been. Push even further beyond, however, and you'll find some of the most dastardly secrets around. A lot of gold bolts you can collect are hidden in plain sight or tucked away in places you would never think to go, but they all reward thinking outside the box or simply having fun and messing around. Some of these secrets I didn't even know existed until the PS3 HD collection. The Metropolis gold bolt under this platform you might not even be aware is there? The gold bolt on Orkson requiring you to visibomb through this tunnel to open up a path on the other side of the level? This is devious in the best possible way. If you're just the kind to head straight through the story though, there's still plenty of treats on the main path. The game doesn't hold back. There's actually some pretty difficult portions of the game that really test your platforming skills, but also your multitasking skills by requiring combat at the same time. Not even each level, each branch blends the 2 disciplines in a bunch of different ways, some leaning one way, some leaning towards another. The constant unique gameplay identities that you can ascribe to each makes every planet feel fresh. Take one of my favorites, Blackwater City on planet Rilgar. You have the main path, which takes you through an infested city, pitting you against no less than 3 different types of enemies. Another path ending in a mad dash through a sewer system rapidly filling with water, a hoverboard track, some random dude on the street selling the most expensive and powerful weapon in the galaxy? Even on the planets that are fairly linear, like Umbrus, you have platforming combined with automated turrets, heat-seeking mines, puzzle mechanics, tanks filled with deadly sharks you have to drain and refill, and then you finally face off against this huge boss bigger than any enemy you've fought up to that point. Simply being varied is one thing. Having a bunch of different mechanics that are all fun and fully realized is another, and Ratchet & Clank is definitely in the latter category. I don't think there's a single bad level in this entire game. Some parts are duller than others, sure, but the pacing stays so brisk that you'll never be stuck in one place for too long. With so much consideration in the design of every encounter to make every level, every challenge therein feel like it counts. As the game goes on, it really feels like the game starts testing you more and more on what you've learned through an excellent difficulty curve that culminates in a great final level, combining everything you've had to do throughout the game with loads of tough-as-nails enemies and a final boss that'll really test your mettle. But honestly, some of the best levels are those like Poketaru that just let you vibe, swimming around, not a care in the world. The game strikes a great balance in terms of letting you soak in the sights and expecting some real effort out of you. Never getting frustrating, but being demanding enough at times to make victory feel earned. Of course, victory would come a lot easier if you spent a bit more money, huh? More health, more weapons, anything catch your eye? The weakest part of the gameplay is probably the combat, mainly because it's pretty simple. Look at the guy, hit circle, there you go. If you're feeling frisky, you can aim the weapon yourself with a limited first-person mode, you strategic mastermind you. The more you play, the more bolts you collect, the more weapons you can buy from the omnipresent vendors. All of the weapons you unlock can provide you with tons of different strategies. The Pyrocitor, for example, is a flamethrower that's really useful for crowds. Or you could just break out the Blaster, a good mid-range all-rounder. Or how about the Devastator, a rocket launcher great for doing hefty damage on a single target. And then you have weapons like the Agents of Doom or the Decoy Glove, which are useful in diverting your enemy's attention or just hitting them while they're distracted. My favorite is the Visibomb gun. It's a sort of like RC drone missile that you can pilot all over the level and take out enemies from super far away. This is so cool. This game came out in 2002, I'll remind you. Why is this cooler than 90% of stuff in games today? But whatever tools you prefer, you have a lot of options. Not every weapon is all that great, and the mechanics themselves are limited, but it adds an additional level of thought to the gameplay, gives a good sense of progression as your arsenal builds bigger and bigger and the enemies you fight get badder and badder, and hey, who doesn't like blowing things up in a video game? Some segments also let you play as little Robo-Boy Clank. As opposed to Ratchet's running and gunning style, Clank's levels are slower, more methodical, often requiring you to carefully lead little robots into a series of hazards. They're maybe a little too slow, but they set up a nice contrast between the characters through gameplay. I especially enjoy Orkson, the main bad guy's home planet, polluted to the point at which it's too dangerous for Ratchet to leave the ship, so you explore as Clank. Then you unlock the O2 mask so you can play as Ratchet, and suddenly the levels open up so much bigger than before. It gives a good sense of scale in more ways than one. The swimming levels, even the swimming levels are fun. That's how good this game is. Now, is Ratchet & Clank a perfect game? Hell nah. There's some input lag no matter which version you play, targeting's screwed, there's a severely limited quick select, there can be real bastardy checkpoints for no real reason, and some of the variety sure is. And admittedly, the game doesn't do anything revolutionary or all that new. It's mainly just a collection of tropes and familiar bits of genre, but it's still one of my all-time favorites because everything about it just goes. The story, the gameplay, the graphics and aesthetics, everything feels like it's at the same wavelength. The platforming segments melt and flow into the combat just right. The big wide worlds and high stakes together with the small personal stakes between the lead characters. From top to bottom, the game feels like a solid, fully realized vision with heart, with a message, and a good deal of sass. Truthfully, there are other games that can do what Ratchet & Clank do, but not a lot of games that do it like Ratchet & Clank do it. Memorable characters, engaging world, fun gameplay, cheap soda. Don't know about you, but sounds like a classic to me. So, what's next? Ratchet 2 is a game that really needs no introduction. This one is often considered by many to not only be the best Ratchet game, but one of the best games on the PS2 full stop. Do I agree? Well, no, but it's still a fun game. Definitely a bigger game than Ratchet 1. More levels, more cutscenes, more plot, more mechanics, more hit points, more weapons, more two-set weapons, more shoes for Ratchet to wear. There's a lot of stuff here, and a lot of good stuff, don't get me wrong. But this is also where the overall design definitely starts to shift in a less cool direction. Things don't line up quite as neatly as they did in Ratchet 1. First things first, the story is just not as strong as the first games, though it puts a good foot forward. Riding high after bodying Drek, Ratchet and Clank are feeling like pretty hot shit and are looking to hire themselves out for some heroing. Sure enough, a CEO from another galaxy enlists them into helping retrieve a stolen project, sending them on another galaxy-spanning adventure. Great! Ratchet 1 liked to take the piss out of the idea of the celebrity status and general distrust of the glamour put across by ultimately corporate entities. And sure enough, it turns out the corporation hiring them, the absolute monopoly of a weapon manufacturer keeping you nice and supplied with tools of destruction, is the actual bad guy, and it's on Ratchet and Clank to ditch the glitz and glam they once rebelled against and get back to who they once were to save the day. We're bringing down the man. Bish, bash, clap, clap, clap. Very nice, very good. So what happens to just not make it quite click into place? I think, honestly, it mostly comes down to the ending. The best way I can put it is that Ratchet 2's story just becomes something else at the end. Spoiler alert, I'm gonna talk about the ending. Look out, hurry, mute it, it's coming up! So it turns out that the CEO of the corporation is actually Captain Quark, a character from the first game, deliberately releasing the untested and wildly dangerous product for the sake of starting a fiasco so he can stage a heroic comeback. Chicanery! A ruse! Of course, Ratchet saves the day, Quark gets... we'll just call it consequences. Clank gets a girlfriend or something, and everyone just kinda goes home.
And so the story decided to end.
Just to be clear, the twist doesn't ruin the story at all, no way, no how. And I actually do like the twist, because I like Quark as a character.
Come on, Quark, I know it's you.
The name's Steve. Pleased to meet you. Thank you, and have a Quark-tastic day.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
But you can tell him being put into the story was a last-minute thing, you know? Thematically speaking, he's not laced in there quite so tightly. I mean, like, he did a naughty thing and gets his comeuppance, great. But what about Megacorp? We see the real CEO at the ending and he's all like, "Thank you for releasing me." And then we just kinda forget about him. There's a sort of implicit heel turn by this twist in which we go from shouldn't have blindly trusted that corporation to nah, man, the corporation was actually a good guy, it was just the one bad guy. Doesn't feel like it follows through with what's set up before is my point, both by this game and the first, so it just ends on a sort of weird note. Plus the final boss fight is trash, but that's another issue entirely. I think the other thing is that the story doesn't feel like it has that second level the first games does, with its focus on Ratchet & Clank's interpersonal drama. Not that going Commando needed more of that, of course. Ratchet and Clank are obviously going to be good bros at this point, so it's good that the plot doesn't BS some reason to get them fighting again. There's still an enjoyable sense of just being a pair of dudes having a grand adventure through a sprawling and varied galaxy, with a good camaraderie between the leads. It's just not like that personal stuff anymore, so it doesn't feel like it's clocking in on more cylinders than the one, you feel me? It's a bit less their story, you dig? We coasting instead of cruising, you feel me? What am I saying? This is also where Ratchet's character starts to slip a little bit. One of the prevailing criticisms of the first Ratchet & Clank was how abrasive Ratchet's personality can be. And yeah, I'll concede that sometimes that side of him gets pushed a little too far to the point at which he just seems petty.
He needs our help.
Yeah? Why don't you go help him? Into another trap? Well, go on. Go fight some evil.
But I think Insomniac Games has overcorrected way too hard since then. I mean, it's like I said, Ratchet & Clank have gotten through their rough patch. Ratchet doesn't really have a reason to get to that level anymore. He's gonna be more mellow no matter what you do. The boy's still got plenty of spice.
Is it dangerous?
Actually, yes, it is.
Good.
But now he also has moments in which he weirdly doesn't. Pull out your gun, Ratchet, your gun! Where are you going? He's more passive generally, to the point of almost feeling like a non-entity in certain scenes. Like, in-game, he doesn't even change faces when you pull out different guns anymore. It's like he doesn't even care. He's more likable in a general sense, perhaps, but when a character's primary activity is merciless slaughter, sanding down the edges doesn't sit quite right, especially considering how much more going Commando leans into combat this time around. Plenty of twists and sprinkles have been added onto the first game's formula, first and foremost a much girthier arsenal of weapons with loads more destructive power than anything in the first game, barring the Rhino, of course. Ideal for mowing down quintuple the amount of enemies you'd faced before. In addition, Ratchet's much snappier to control. He's a lot lighter and less laggy, allowing for much faster twitch reactions. This comes bundled with a much easier strafing feature. The first game had strafing, but only on the thruster pack, and you had to like double tap crouch and then hold another button and send in a mail-in rebate. Yeah, it was clumsy and kinda baffling. Now you just hold L2 or R2. Bravissimo! Though the same can't be said for jumping while strafing, which tends to throw off your aim and locks you into very fixed momentum. And it can be annoying in later missions having to hold a shoulder button and like keep wiggling between aiming and hitting circle for what feels like every fight. How about we give it a B+? It definitely feels like there's a lot more happening on a per second basis this go around, and it can actually be pretty challenging if you don't pay for all the weapons and armor like a good little consumer. Although they're not all winners, truth be told, and the balance is all kinds of scuffed. A lot of weapons overlap and overshadow each other quite a bit, like the Synthenoids and the Turglove, which both function as just press the button and then forget about it, or the Bouncer versus any other explosive weapon, or indeed any weapon in any game ever. Some of them feel useless once you get far enough in the game, or even right as you unlock them, with how high damage scaling can get. As much as I want to give the game the benefit of the doubt that this is like some planned obsolescence scheme, there's just enough variation in how the weapons work to the point I don't feel like the intention was, look, it's the mini nuke too, upgrade now! Overall, I don't really feel like many of the weapons stand out the way they did in the first game when they all had pretty much unique functions and useful applications. I feel like I use every weapon in going Commando the same way and just pointing it at the thing fronting on me and mashing away at the circle button. I get it, it's a faster game. No time to think when you have 30 million bullets screaming your way. And it's fun, yeah, and it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's good. You don't need careful planning messing up that flow. It's just the slight pivot into twitchier combat gives the game a different feel to the first. Not a uniformly bad feel, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss being more careful in considering how each individual weapon functions to create some funky strategy. What can I say? I'm a thinking man. I'm the weirdo that enjoys the Visibomb and the spider thing this game has. Perhaps the most substantial and awkward addition is the very light RPG mechanics Going Commando introduces, which have gone on to become a series standard. It's simple, really. Use a weapon to gain XP for that weapon. Gain enough XP and the weapon will level up. It's the model all the Ratchet games use going forward, but I've never actually liked this system, and here's why. You spend all this time using a new weapon, getting a feel for it, and then you finally upgrade it to the point it gets a cool new function or feature, and now instantly it doesn't feel like there's a point to using it anymore. The primary motivator for using a weapon isn't out of strategy or creative thinking, it's to arbitrarily max out its numbers. You put so much time into building a big arsenal only to use like 2 or 3 weapons at a time. You can still earn general XP to gradually buff up your health bar, but you get the same general XP if you use a weapon that still needs its own personal XP. So if anything, using maxed out gear feels like a waste, or at the very least a last resort. It just seems like an artificial way to enforce a sense of variety. I think this system also contributes to the enemy encounter design in certain areas being pretty dull, considering that with this system a player might want to use any weapon anywhere. So there's a more generic design throughout the game focused around corridors and ambushes that just lack a certain something. Or it leads to outright terrible levels like Snivelac, which just besiege you from every angle with superlinear sequences of aggravating encounters. Like, areas in the first game made you fight a bunch of dudes but also manage platforming at the same time. It felt like more of blending the two elements of gameplay rather than taking turns. And it's not like Ratchet 2 is devoid of sections like these, especially near the start of the game, but it definitely leans away the more you play. What with 2 whole battle arenas dedicated solely to combat and 2 massive wasteland levels with nothing to do in them but to shoot the things that are in them. And the final level might as well have a careful hand on your shoulder pushing you along. In terms of all of this, I think Going Commando is far from the worst offender. In fact, I think it was the next game that really put it over the edge. But it's still a recurring element of the games I'm going to have to touch on, and I think it planted the seeds early on for what makes later games so dissatisfying. Going Commando definitely has some of the glimmers that made the first game so good. The thing is, whenever I think back on all those good things, it just feels like I kinda have to cherry pick. Be honest, Ratchet fans, when thinking about the cool platforming bits of Going Commando, do you not just think of the dynamo wall on Joba and not much else? Cutscene-wise, does anything truly remarkable spring to mind besides the whole now the computers are charging us bit? Do you know what the whole Clank Stalker girlfriend thing was on about? 'Cause I have no bloody clue what that's on about. The joke is over, I'm legitimately asking. Beneath the standout moments, I feel like things get really blurry. The game really lacks the considered approach to its levels that the first game had when so much of this one is just fight the guys. Even the ship combat just feels like wait for an enemy to show up in front of you. The game as a whole is more direct than the first, and in some ways, that's great, cut out the chaff. But in others, it means that Ratchet 2 just lacks the same layers of engagement that made the first such a classic. The first game feels like a cohesive vision, but Going Commando suffers from a number of cracks in the shell. More combat, but less edge. More direction, but less purpose. It's still a good time, but not quite a great time. But it's at least fun to run through again with one of the best New Game Plus systems in all of PlayStation history. Going Commando lays the basis for what's become the staple model for the Ratchet & Clank New Game Plus, and it's a real humdinger. In addition to what you might expect, i.e. more upgrade options for weapons on top of tougher enemies, Going Commando gives you a bolts multiplier that increases the more enemies you kill up to a maximum of times 20. However, if you get hit, the multiplier falls all the way back to 1. This I like. It's a great way to quickly catch up on all the weapons and armor you missed out on the first go round, and not only incentivizes playing well, but also playing with all those weapons you're stockpiling, since the best way to not get hit is to ensure not a single organism in the room remains unvaporized. Combined with all the fancy unlockables on offer, this is a game you can't play through just once, and I think that's always a good thing. So yeah, Ratchet 2, plenty of style, some real highlights, decent enough, but not quite hitting the same way as Game 1, you know? Of course I kvetch and complain and nitpick, but it doesn't get much better after this. I'm gonna be blunt about this. I am not a fan of Up Your Arsenal. Yeah, I know it's Metacritic's favorite and all, but I'm just not about it. Even as a youngin', I could just tell something was off with this one. Like, it's more Ratchet, but like, not more of the good parts. And looking back now, it's pretty clear to me how this game represents the true first step in the Ratchet & Clank series' downwatering. Cause compared to everything before, Up Your Arsenal actually sucks. Like, for real this time. Or, in a way that didn't suck before. What am I saying? Let's start with the story, which, ironically, itself starts pretty okay. Ratchet and Clank, well, mostly Clank, have their own big show, all glamming it up with a celebrity lifestyle, and it's like, cool, that's something the previous games touched on, how all that pomp and showbiz made a great smokescreen for the snide and the cheaty and isn't actually all that desirable a status. And then of course that fake-ass glamour is how Ratchet and Clank get recognized around rather than their actual accomplishments.
How are things on the front lines, soldier? Is that Secret Agent Clank?
But then in slides good old Dr. Nefarious McBad Guy, whose motive is racism, cause he hates organic life forms, even though he was one himself before, and he's teaming up with organic life forms now? Wait, and he thinks that Clank's show is real life? And then for big chunks of the game, Ratchet and the other one are hanging around these largely unrelated shticky robot soldier types who are in a war? But it's goofy. There's furry Bill Clinton, robot Britney Spears, monkey? What's the gag here? What's the rub, the hook, the juice, the horncorn? I'll spoil right now, you can't answer that question, because it's all just jokes! The focus present in games 1 and 2 and the biting satirical edge they delivered is totally scuttled in Up Your Arsenal, in exchange for scattered pop culture references and general whackiness that are altogether too scattershot to interlace in any bigger picture. Ratchet and Clank take part in the plot, but they don't really drive it this time around. It's less a planet-hopping intergalactic adventure between two dudes. Now it's a generic local hero saves the day story with a larger suite of secondary characters, but at the cost of losing that feel of a big galaxy full of unique places and faces. Those one-off characters that got their buck and left always gave the first game so much charm. The galaxy itself was a main character before, now it's barely set dressing. Like, why are we even buying weapons anymore? Firearm economy and omnipresent industry was always integral to the first two games' stories and worlds, but it's incidental here, lost in a mess of frou-for-all. There's no firm center anymore. And okay, maybe we don't actually want to tell a story flat out about racism or something. Maybe we don't feel duly equipped for it, whatever, okay. Then why'd you bring it up, huh? And if it's all just meant to be kooky, shouty, crazy bad guy whackiness, why is no one calling him out on it? It's all jokes, but jokes need setups and payoffs. This would hardly qualify as a grab bag. Maybe I'm overthinking things. Perhaps this go-round we just want to be a bunch of chuckle sluts, doing anything for a good giggle. And, well, they're not all misses.
It was mating season. How could I have known she was your sister?
Plus, this game introduces us to Dr. Nefarious's butler Lawrence, who fills my dark soul with light.
That moron could never hope to match wits with the likes of me.
If anyone can beat a moron at his own game, it's you, sir.
You are my king, Lawrence! I especially appreciate Quark having a spot of redemption. Not huge development or anything, but it does feel warranted and makes the trilogy feel more cohesive, and he's an enjoyable character. The thing is, stepping back to take it all in, it's just mostly straightforward save-the-day hero stuff with a light garnish of Snickers. When the original game and 80% of Going Commando was that stacked on top of strong central satires and character dynamics. So regardless of anything, it feels like we've dropped a level. And we already dropped a level with Going Commando, so I don't even want to think about where that leaves us. I know this has never been a series to lean too hard against in terms of plot, even at the peak, but that doesn't excuse the lack of trying. But it's really the gameplay that does this one in for me. Hot diggity biscuits is this game so much more boring than the first two. The OG and Going Commando were lovely and 80% lovely blends of platforming, combat, and exploration. Up Your Arsenal is not. There's no dancing around it. We're a shooter now. Straight up, we're a linear third-person, vaguely bullet hell shooter. Oh sure, you have to jump a gap or two, and that one planet has a branching path. That one planet we all know by name solely because it's the only planet with a branching path in the game. What you will do in every other planet is start at one end, get to the other, and persuade everything in between to graciously let you by through an irresponsible trove of bringers of sweet death. Game, set, match. And you know what? Totally cool. Seriously. I'd even deign to admit that Up Your Arsenal is fun. With the premier strategy being always moving and hoping you're moving out of the way of the bullets, and with there being plenty of bullets at times, combat requires a degree of attention and dexterity without being overly demanding in what it expects from you, giving the game an ideal balance of being easy to sink into without being totally mind-numbing. It leads to a lot of organic thrills, and some of the weapons you get are the series' best, swear down. This whip. I love this whip. So what's wrong? What makes me cry? Thing is, as a shooter, Up Your Arsenal's got a terminal case of clunk. Encounters are more demanding, but the control style and physics are identical to that of going Commando, which, as you recall, hopefully you recall because I just said it like 7 minutes ago, are exceedingly awkward. Jump momentum is as stiff as Grant's upper lip, which is a bit of a pisser because that's your main means of getting out of the way of the bullets. And all the claw gripping to strafe, jump, and fire is an even bigger bugbear on account of the game being significantly more about combat. Mercifully, the game does offer a lock strafe scheme to put fire on R1 and jump on L1, holla, which goes highly recommended by me. The camera being so much more stiff will take some adjusting to, and it won't fix the janky jumping, but at least you'll cut down on some finger gymnastics. I should warn you though that for whatever reason, using the gravity boots on elaborate walkways while using this control scheme can give the camera frickin' conniptions, so if you're easily motion sick, you might have to tap out and enjoy the arthritis. But even with that sorted, all the fun you'll have in the combat encounters, you'll have in the first 2 hours, because by then you'll have fought every non-boss enemy in the game. In other Ratchet games, every planet had unique enemy types, with individual attack patterns and funny sounds when you walloped them. Up your arsenal, there are like 2 planets with unique enemies. Everywhere else you get Little Tyrannoid, Medium Tyrannoid, Zoftig Tyrannoid, Soldier Guy, Ninja from Fortnite, over and over and over and over, planet after planet after planet after planet. There is enough padding up your arsenal that you'll spend about as much time in it as you would in the other games, but all that time will be spent facing the same guys over and over in levels that are all linear sequences of ambushes. If that, a lot of planets are just singular battle arenas on loan from the multiplayer. How is that exciting? And then they back you out after every mission to make you manually select the next one? You're gonna sit there and tell me this is the best Ratchet game? I still don't like the whole use the weapon to level it up system for all the same reasons as I mentioned before, but in Up Your Arsenal it's even worse, because weapons have 5 whole levels. That's even more time you put into a weapon, getting so many various upgrades for it, and when you finally max it out and get an exciting new feature for it, alright, pack it in, time to move on to the next one. Like, this is the good part, but now it doesn't feel worth using. And maybe it's because of the different level tiers, but damage scaling in this game is straight jank. Look how many shots it takes to kill this guy. This is a level 4 starting gun not even halfway through the game. He's not even flinching. And like going Commando, though the weapons are cool, there's no synergies or strategies with which to experiment. Every weapon does fine in every situation, right down to the effective range and rate of fire. Just keep mashing R1, or circle if you're crazy, until you fall over or the thing does. There's no evolution or growth to what you can do or learn over the course of the game, just a backpack getting more and more overstuffed. See, my problem is we're leaning into the action side of the established series gameplay, but we're not actually evolving or deepening the design around the action to the point at which it feels like an action game. The guise of being an explorative platformer is still here, through the controls, through the level design, even through the occasional puzzle gadget, but it's not in service of anything other than bridging the fights together. Even the hacking minigame isn't a puzzle or anything, it's like Gradius or something. You have levels like Tyrannosis or parts of Iridia that seem like these huge places fit to explore using various vehicles, but all these bits boil down to is following waypoints on your minimap. And then you reach those waypoints and okay, back to shooting. There's no sense of adventure, but the combat isn't developed enough to make up for it, and the story's too ditzy to charm its way out. It's like, no matter where you look in Up Your Arsenal, what's not watered down only showed up halfway. It's just less good. And on top of that, it's ugly! Okay, maybe not ugly, but enough that I not only feel a need to bring it up, but to double down. Bland, washed out colors, basically no attention to lighting whatsoever, missing animations, garish menu design. I wouldn't harp so hard if this game literally didn't drag down previous games' qualities along with it. Really makes you appreciate the ambience and effortless atmosphere of Blackwater City and Metropolis when you're playing through what feels like the 8th grade diorama versions. What happened to my lighting? Give it back! And I don't even like going Commando's menus as it is, but come on, you thought the way they'd be improved is making them the color of sick? And make it so you can't see your selection over empty rings in the quick select management menu? 1 star, Insomniac! Okay, I'm exaggerating for comedy again. Up Your Arsenal isn't terrible by any definition, even mine, but it just does not come close to the other Ratchet games in my opinion. It really feels like a bare minimum Ratchet experience. The skeleton is there, but none of the muscles. The bolted-on aesthetics and austere cutscenes are here, but none of the grit and dry wit. So much of the experience feels like it's straight up missing. Hearing years later about how the game actually was quite rushed, to the point at which it was apparently a flat-out disaster literally weeks before launch, makes a lot of sense, truthfully. Low enemy variety, short single-path levels, reuse of arenas, scattered plotting, an entire coat of polish missing. Yeah, it's pretty easy to tell this didn't get quite enough time to cook. Suppose this was all for incorporating the multiplayer mode. Was it worth it? I'm legitimately asking. I've never played the multiplayer. Is it even still up? Hang on, let me check. Yeah, I don't think so. Oh well. Maybe I'm just an uppity sort of broad. The game's harmless enough fun, but its lack of firm direction compared to its predecessors really damages it, in my opinion. 3 games in, it feels like we fumbled the thread, if not lost it entirely. What an underwhelming way to end an otherwise solid series. Unless... Might get controversial here, but to me, Ratchet Deadlocked is the real Ratchet 3. I'm serious. I know what you're thinking. Scott, honey, baby, Bubala, you're joking me. This game is literally all of the things you complained about with Up Your Arsenal, but it's worse. And you're telling me it's actually one of the best in the series? Well, yeah, and here's why. Ratchet Deadlocked goes all in. Up Your Arsenal's problem was that it didn't commit. It was a half-assed platformer grafted onto an awkward third-person shooter, which just led to the most mediocre of both worlds. But Deadlocked isn't shilly-shallying between squat. We're here for combat, and by Quark's smooth chassis, we got combat.
Bring it.
Lock strafe right from the get-go. Ooh, fluid snappy strafe jumping for complete control in the air and on the battlefield. L1 as a jump input? Stop it, I'm swooning. Ratchet Deadlocked is a fast-paced, almost hyperactive shooter, pitting you against dozens upon dozens of enemies at once, and it is awesome. That, my friends, is the Deadlock difference. This game is designed through and through to be as pure an action title as it gets. Jumping, quick select, firing, aiming, everything except for swinging your wrench you'd want to do in combat is on the shoulder buttons, so you never have to lift your thumb off the right stick. Enemies drop ammo now when they die, a series first that keeps the pace up. In single player, you have these 2 battle bots to help draw aggro, and you're gonna need the help. Every level is a constant onslaught of enemies shooting fast-moving projectiles that will hit you like a truck if you don't stay on the move. I'm not even joking when I compare this game to something like Doom Eternal. Okay, maybe a little exaggerating, but still, it's in that wheelhouse. With the variety of the arena designs, the weapons at your disposal, the enemy behaviors, the bosses, vehicle segments, and the suites of legitimately fun and unique challenges on offer to give your progression a bit more agency, the game stays fresh in every moment, and is an absolute blast in every sense. In fact, the weakest parts of this game are when it shoehorns in some platforming. Look, platforms, we know what those are, you still love us, right? Compared to the other Ratchet games, there are less planets, less weapons, the game itself is notably shorter, but all of this contributes to Deadlock's impeccable focus as a highly concentrated dose of adrenaline. I would much rather have 10 weapons that each have specific uses than 100 weapons that all feel the same. Now I'm picking weapons based on my current situation, not because of any numbers it needs or whatever. But Scott, does this mean the weapons leveling through use system is gone? Well, no, but its iteration here is about as good as it gets. The basics still apply. All your weapons hit harder the more you use them. Every level increases your damage, but also a specific stat kindly specified at the level up screen, which is always a nice bit of transparency. But in Deadlocked, a weapon can go all the way up to level 10, giving you a long time with it before you have to drop it. For this playthrough I did for footage, I only maxed out 2 weapons out of the 10, and both of them were during the final level. Plus, if you buy the Mega Weapons in New Game Plus, those can go up to 99. Damn! It's the same numbers game, but when the numbers go up so high, you can practically ignore them, while consistently feeling rewarded without interrupting the flow of the game, and it makes an additional New Game Plus run almost inevitable. You can also modify and specialize weapons using a variety of weapon mods. Okay, I'll admit this never quite clicked for me. A nice option, I suppose, but I feel like there are a lot of right answers here and what mods should go on what, you know? Cluster bombs on the Arbiter, napalm on the B6 Obliterator, shock on everything else. I think I would have rather liked if these mod effects were just added on naturally to specific weapons through upgrading, or maybe if the customization was pushed even a bit further, but I'm not unhappy with what's here. Nice to add a touch of personalization, a nice push to replay levels and experiment with new combos. Even the vehicle bits are pretty fun, well, most of them are. I could take or leave the hoverbike, and the Landstalker walks about as fast as your mum through a fully stocked bakery. And we really missed an opportunity here for some sort of wall climbing mechanic. But I especially like when the campaign levels don't lock you in a vehicle and let you get out if you feel a need. Makes things feel a bit more organic, you know? I mentioned Doom, but there's a definite whiff of Halo influence about the game, especially with the combat focus and the aforementioned vehicles that are often organically lying around and you can never quite decide if they control well or not. They call this one the Puma. Huh, weird. Looks more like a warthog to me. And then there's the story. I like the Deadlocked story. Maybe I'm biased given how Deadlocked was actually my first Ratchet game, but I still enjoy it. It's not like incredible or super surprising, and definitely steeped in the mid-2000s emo.
You're dead, Ace.
But its satire, while probably the least subtle in all the series, is perhaps its most consistent. Sensationalizing and marketing violence as its own sport is something previous games touched on with the combat arenas, but Deadlocked really blows it up with the whole Vox television network. You got the news crew making up fake stories to demonize Ratchet and build hype for his battles, the CEO hyper-focused on marketing with absolutely zero regard to ethics and restraint, the sheer depravity of it all, trying to sell these heartless murderers as icons for kids to buy toys of, not even hiding how blatantly they're manufacturing all the lies about Ratchet, so people just don't like him as much. It's simple, but over the top in such a fun way. Some of the cutscenes in Deadlocked, swear down, are the best in the series. I'm not kidding. You know, I say fun, it's definitely a bit of a darker game tone-wise than the previous three, but if anything, I think that sells its points even better. The bad guy feels like a serious threat, the stakes feel authentically high. It's cartoony sci-fi, but it's still raw, violent aggression no matter where you turn, and taking that more seriously adds weight to the atmosphere of the game. The tone feels like it recognizes the gameplay for what it is, and that makes the satire pop even more. Tonally, this is one of the more solid Ratchet games. This game also features a rare and marvelous thing in Ratchet actually having character again. Starting out, the big goof's smitten with the glitzy hotshot gladiator lifestyle, but as the game goes on, he starts recognizing the horrible violence for what it is and starts taking it seriously, until the end, where he's willing to sacrifice his life so a stadium full of fans and heroes can get to safety. What a legend! See, this is what I want, flashes of his original selfishness tempered by his experience and cooler head. Sure hope they keep pushing that angle further in new games instead of dropping it entirely. Oh boy, can't wait. It's not emphasized too hard and there's not a lot of it, but the narrative side of Deadlocked ties a nice little bow on one of the most consistently solid visions in the whole series. There are no compromises in what Deadlocked says and what it ultimately is. The game has the same everything goes quality as the first Ratchet game, but in a whole new dimension that lets it stand alone. It's a great shooter in its own right. Just a shame it's easily the worst PS3 port of the tetralogy. In-engine cutscenes have the characters constantly juddering around every 2 seconds and extremely noticeable clipping issues left, right, and center. The color commentary offered by the announcers is broken outside of what's scripted, so hope you like hearing.
You know, sometimes I think I should have taken that job on Annihilation Nation. They've got a great naval plan.
Every mission. Additionally, switching weapons has the chance to make the game hitch a second, even when it's automatic like on grind rails. And sometimes it won't even switch the weapon, despite appearing to, making this version pretty dissatisfying in every department. And that sucks, cause Deadlocked is a great game. I'm sure I've made that very clear through this video, how much I enjoy it. It's not a perfect game, and when you think of it by the criteria of specifically a Ratchet game, Deadlocked's gonna come up short for you. But Deadlocked isn't designed like a traditional Ratchet game. Even considering it as one just seems wrong. This is purely an action game through and through, and a damn fun one at that. What sets it apart is what makes it so good. To write it off, I think does this game a tremendous disservice. And if nothing else, it is a hearty send-off to this duo's adventures on the PS2. That about wraps things up for the Ratchet & Clank games on PS2. Through all the highs and lows, one thing's for sure. I wasn't the only one these two knuckleheads made an impression on during their time on the platform. And hot on the heels of Deadlocked, a new generation of PlayStation was lifting its big old chunky head over the horizon. Ooh, baby. Imagine what the Ratchet series could do with all that horsepower. Well, there's something about the PS3 Ratchet & Clank games that just doesn't sit quite right with me. Sorry, the Ratchet & Clank Future games, how could I forget? The games have a different fundamental feel to them compared to those of the PS2. A bad feel? Hard to say, really. These aren't bad games, far from them. But this is where the series really starts to crumble under an identity crisis, and I can't help but wonder if Up Your Arsenal is to blame. Just a quick note before we pounce on this next artery. I want to apologize for the quality of the A Crack in Time footage, or rather the lack thereof. I don't have my original copy anymore, and since apparently all other copies have been sealed away in the lost city of El Dorado, the most cost-effective way I could play was streaming the game through PlayStation Now. The experience was actually a lot smoother than I expected it to be, and the footage doesn't look all that... Well, it might look a bit chunky compared to other games, and that's why. I have but the one apology to offer, so please, share amongst yourselves. But, accept it or don't, let's get to gabbing about these shiny new bits of crumpet. what was left behind in the jump to new hardware, and why I can't help but wonder if the series' critical darling might be the root cause. See, when Ratchet & Clank started out, it did so as a hybrid of styles, blending platforming and firearm combat atop a foundation of exploring vast and varied galaxies, themselves founded on themes of overbearing consumerism and the self-absorption arising from such. Up Your Arsenal was and isn't that, but not entirely on purpose. Well documentedly, the game was rushed out the door, which left it a much more linear, combat-focused game with a more cut-and-dry narrative that filled in the gaps with LOL random jokes. It was essentially half the Ratchet experience, but it also was and still is the most critically successful game in the series despite this. And one can't help but wonder if Insomniac Games couldn't help but wonder, are we trying too hard? I mean, why else for these future games would we be back to fixed momentum strafe jumping and linear levels, just like Up Your Arsenal? Why else would the future games' plots be more concerned with loosely threading along jokes than leading up to any more provocative a point? Now, let me back up for a second. What I'm going to talk about today, I don't want it to sound like I'm climbing atop my highest brow, all like, Ratchet & Clank used to be such a sophisticated satire of consumer society. If only they hadn't gone and dumbed it down for the peons. Look at what these games title themselves. These are not sophisticated games. Truthfully, even the best Ratchet games aren't particularly deep, but they are consistent. You look at a conversation with an NPC, or a gameplay mechanic like buying weapons, all these different aspects of a game, you can trace it back to the same underlying themes. The games have deeper meanings. And not being about consumerism and the stuff the other games were about is fine. We're 5 games in, hell to the yes, we should be doing new things. The problem is, the Ratchet series has never put together a solid identity after losing the consumerism bend. Games like Up Your Arsenal, these future games, there's no between the lines. Robot space pirates, fluffy critters piloting murder machines, death by disco, all of these things in the future series, they're not part of any bigger picture. They're their own jokes waiting for a punchline and a laugh track. When the villains are all treated like big goofs, none of them feel like actual threats representing any more abstract danger. All this attempt at generic mythology thrown into the mix, turns out Ratchet's the last of a super special species that saved the universe, and Clank's actually mystical keeper of all time, just doesn't land right 5 games in when it's not founded on anything from previous games. Quite the opposite, in fact, but more on that later. You could wheedle some broad concepts out from the future games, especially A Crack in Time, like heritage or friendship and leaving the past where it is, but it's all surface level, and all things we've seen done so many times in so many other places. It's all parts and pieces, individual moments. There's no character. I've said it once, I've said it twice, I'll say it 1,000 flippin' times. The galaxies in the original Ratchet games used to feel like characters in their own right, because of the themes that underlaid the narratives and how we would see them reflected in the places we'd visit and in the characters with whom we'd speak. When planets only serve as stepping stones towards the end of a narrow hero plot, when we're stuck with only a small cast of maybe 7 characters we see everywhere, there's no real sense of scale. This isn't hard. Hell, A Crack in Time comes really close with a slew of various alien NPCs. It just doesn't hit the mark when there's no interconnectivity between them to make them feel like part of the same galaxy. Ratchet barely even talks to them, and when he does, it's through voiceless dialogue options. The only interactions we get are with the characters that matter. Every planet's just a new backdrop for the next scene of the Save the Day play. Like, name 5 planets from the future games right now. Do it, right now. I only remember Jacindu because of that stupid boss that makes you do the grind rails again if you die, because this level is an ass. All Ratchet games have been hero save the day stories when you break them down, but the best give it meaning more than that. Breaking the cycle of endangering lives for a profit, toppling a corrupt media empire. The future games take away that layer, and in its place they push this generic last-of-his-kind lore. You know what would make this character so much more interesting? Divine birthright! I don't know what up-and-coming hotshot writer needs to hear this, but tacking things on to your character's backstory does not make them more interesting. Giving Ratchet a Goku Son of Krypton origin story doesn't do anything but put most of the storytelling in past tense, as we explain why, no really, he's so cool, you guys. The hard truth is that Ratchet's family life has never really been a concern to neither him nor us. He can be curious, sure, by all means, but when this last of his race shtick becomes the sole basis of his character, and that he decides to drop everything and everyone at the chance to save the Lombaxes, it doesn't feel genuine. It's not an evolution of his character, it's not even a new spin on it. He's as empty a non-entity as he's ever been. And Clank, I don't even think Clank verbally acknowledges the whole mystic timekeeper thing outside of the one time. He doesn't even throw out a non-committal, that's cool. He's just so casually like, well, this is my backstory now. And that's the big deal to me. How completely detached from previous games these new plots feel, thematically, character-wise, all of it. It all feels like it's trying to invent new reasons to care about the characters rather than building on what's there. They don't explain anything in greater detail, they don't recontextualize anything in a way that actually affects our understanding of the previous games. As a matter of fact, it feels like there's a conscious effort to ignore previous games. Ratchet is the last of his species, that's why we've never seen any Lombaxes in the game before, you see? Except we did, very prominently, in Going Commando. Angela Cross. Major character. One of the most important characters in that game, actually. Guess what? Lombax. Right there. Other Lombax. What was even the thought process here? Like, think about this. Tools of Destruction released 4 years after Going Commando. Literally a shorter gap than there's been between the 2016 reboot and Rift Apart in 2021. 4 years! And they just decide, yeah, no one will notice if we completely retcon out a prominent character from one of our most celebrated games. Like, if that doesn't tip you off as to the attitudes going into this game, I don't know what will. We're literally pretending previous games didn't exist to make this generic new tat work. And I know, they clumsily retcon it further in A Crack in Time by mentioning Angela actually got saved by Cool Hand McSpace Dude or whatever.
Lombax rebel Angela Cross has been missing for almost 3 years. She was a victim of former dictator Percival Tachyon's vendetta against the Lombaxes, and was last seen fleeing the Cerulean sector in Max Apogee's starship.
But that is still so friggin' weak. Ratchet knew Angela. Ratchet interacted with Angela. He doesn't mention her once this entire sub-series.
So you're a Lombax who's never seen another Lombax.
What, is Angela bullying him and he's too scared to talk about her? And I know, I am not the first person to bring this up, or even the 50th, millionth, but I feel like I'm the only one who's mad enough about it. I just don't get it. Why not include Angela in the story, make her part of this? Why just ignore her? No, guys, come on, we remember Angela totally. Look, she's even got her own paint job named after her for the Constructo Bomb glove. Pink and white, it's her colors. What do you mean those colors aren't associated with her at all? I thought you said she was a girl. How tasteless can you get? Meanwhile, I don't even know what to make of Clank's Time Lord thing he's got going on. I feel like I need to comment on it, but, what do I say? What even is it? It's barely about Clank. He's basically his own plotline's middleman between this thing and Nefarious. He arguably has lost more character in these games than Ratchet has. Here's the thing, though. I could maybe go for one. Preferably Clank, cause, yeah, kinda weird for a reject Warbot model to be 1/10 the scale of the regular with no firepower whatsoever. Probably fine with that being retconned into some Chosen One thing. But when you're telling me that the last of a race that saved the universe and the super important prophesized keeper of time just accidentally crash-landed on the same planet and became the bestest buds in the universe, that's when I turn into Jeff Goldblum deciding whether or not to accept another piece of cake. You see, finds a way, See, the problem isn't doing this whole Chosen One thing for either or Ratchet and Clank. The problem is that I'm not convinced any of it matters. It just feels like such contrivance. Even if we play along and pretend Angela never existed until we're called out for it like Insomniac was, what's the end goal here? How does this lore make any of these characters more interesting? Maybe I'm alone in thinking this, but I always thought that Ratchet being some guy just made him so much more appealing. Like, he could have been anyone, didn't matter who or what he was, it just happened to be him, and now look at him. From selfish nobody to hero for the ages. But now it turns out that he was always some cool guy, just shy of being outright prophesized to save the universe. Clank's not some innocent eye thrust into the deep end of greed, proof that goodwill will always prevail. Now he's some star child birthed in glorious purpose to keep order in the universe. Even the plumber isn't safe. Instead of just some relatable, cynical working Joe making his buck in an economically unequal galaxy, now he's like the Watcher for this universe or something? Knows everything that has ever happened and will ever happen? The word really is relatable, isn't it? All this bullshit, Chosen Ones and space prophecies, this isn't life. This isn't what happens in life. Ratchet and Clank has always been sci-fi, but its world and characters were always rooted in real-world values and attitudes. There's nothing real about the future games. Being sci-fi was never the point of early Ratchet games, but with the future games, that's all they have going. I can't imagine anyone getting attached to the series through these games as their introduction. What would even stand out to those people? The main characters with no personality or development? The villain whose crown is too big for he head? Mr. Zircon?
Our friends!
Why can't Mr. Zircon not shoot? Why can Mr. Zircon not shoot little fuckboys? Stupid fuckboy. Why can't Mr. Zircon not kill? Mr. Zircon is bored.
If you were to take out the context of the previous games, all you're left with is done-to-death tropes and a zonkers mythology wrapped up in plots that aren't even consistent with themselves.
Only two stayed behind. The Keeper of the Dimensionator and his infant son.
Well, then what about this Joker?
We were approached by an inventor with incredible ideas.
But I thought they said...
Percival Tachyon, discovered by Lombax trillium miners eons after the war, and raised on Fastum.
Wait, Tachyon was raised by Lombaxes?
And then he said...
Even have the scruples to give you a name.
But then he said...
Only I know your true purpose in this galaxy. Only I know your true name.
And why is it, again, that the Zoni decide to only show up to Clank for all of Tools of Destruction just to say sod it for the rest of the games? Dumb drama?
The Zoni say Talwyn is in trouble.
You know, Clank, just once, I wish you'd listen to your real friends instead of your imaginary ones.
Are we literally so devoted to following templates that we can't stop for literally a second and think about why we're doing what we're doing? I think the thing that really sums up the Future sub-series is the run to the litter, quest for booty. The completely serious, dramatic climax of the game's story is centered around the ghosts of robot pirates. Something that was a joke in Up Your Arsenal. Like, literally word for word.
No previous adventure could have prepared Quark for his encounter with the dread pirate Blackstar and his crew of... Oh, please tell me this is a typo.
That's robotic pirate ghosts.
I mean, I've worked on some real junk, but this one takes the cake. Pirate ghost robots. What do they think, we're idiots?
At this point, this series has become its own punchline. It's kinda sad, honestly. Just completely lose all self-awareness. To become so insecure, you end up becoming the exact kind of overproduced, over-sensationalized culture you yourself once ridiculed. The first games didn't even have a writing team, yet they show a better understanding of narrative and characters, of heart and soul. More so, at least, than these hollow shells. Now, are these stories ultimately bad? Not really, not in a basic definition. Are these games completely devoid of solid moments? Not at all. In fact, the last half an hour or so of A Crack in Time comes incredibly close to being really great. But even the best moments of these games are let down when they feel like they exist by themselves instead of emblems of actually good storytelling. We want the ending of A Crack in Time to be legendary because that's what it should be. That's what it could be. But that near greatness doesn't come from the trilogy it's capping off, it comes from this idea of the series as a whole. I feel like when thinking about A Crack in Time's ending, my mind automatically jumps over everything from the PS3 era up to that point, cause seriously, what did it add? This ending could have rolled with the particulars changed around right after the PS2 saga ended with much of the same emotional impact intact. Imagine if the space had actually been filled with content that felt like it truly embraced the duo's past experiences, explored the relationship even further, actually built up instead of swapped out. Without any of that, these stories are, ultimately, basic, bottom-line competent sci-fi fare. What's most disappointing is how much more they could have been. You can't expect to grow if you keep cutting away the roots. I really don't have much to say about the gameplay in these future games. Honestly, it's just more of what came before. Same old blend of platforming and shooting, but still invariably leaning towards the latter, and unfortunately with the same focus on linearity as Up Your Arsenal. Going even further, actually, to the point at which every level is one big glorified corridor. And hip hip hooray! We've regressed back to stiff strafe jumping, awkward damage scaling, and the anti-fun weapon leveling system, which basically serves as a conveyor belt taking a weapon from usefulness all the way down to the trash bin. All of this stuff is basically intact from the PS2 era, just with all the weapon names switched around each time, and about 20 tons more bloom and particle effects. Like, holy hell, can I see, please? In terms of what each game adds to the formula, which admittedly isn't much, Tools of Destruction throws in a new weapon category called devices, which are ostensibly more tactical than conventional weapons, but functionally they're pretty much just weapons, but considering how they don't level up and how their ammo is pretty damn rare and or expensive for how weak they can be, they don't feel all that useful. Since the game was a launch window title for the PS3, it's also chock full of 6-axis motion control bits. Wow! Each of which manages to be more annoying than the last. Wow! You can turn them off if you want to destroy your immersion, you sensible human being! Because, let's be real, the left stick's the better option. No one's angry at you, I'm sorry for yelling. Tools of Destruction also introduces a new Raritanium upgrade system, which is... Yeah, okay, so what happens is that you collect these crystals, right? And then when you're at a vendor, you can use said crystals to upgrade specific stats for a weapon. This is pretty bad. Staring at a menu, bumping up stats that may or may not be noticeable in gameplay, more numbers made obsolete when the weapon hits max level and it's on to the next one. I really don't get why we need to have this on top of the regular through use system. It's like we wanted to rework upgrading weapons, but also didn't really, and now we're saddled with two underwhelming mechanics. 1/2 times 1/2 does not equal 1 whole. Also, I don't know if this stat stuff is part of it, but holy hell, this game's damage scaling is garbage. Why is everything so damn tanky? So many enemies in this game do stupid amounts of damage while also having stupid amounts of health, which can make this game feel like such a damn grindfest. I guess I could mitigate things a little bit by buying some armor, but have you seen the sets in this game? They're the grossest thing I've ever seen. I'm not besmirching my body with them. And I guess fair's fair, you can kinda cheat right back by constantly topping off health and ammo if there's a nearby vendor. So I guess we'll call this one a draw. Meanwhile, a Crack in Time's major new addition is a set of hover boots for Ratchet to use to speed around all fast, and yeah, they're pretty fun. Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal had something similar called charge boots, but the boost they gave was pretty fixed, making them awkward to use in normal gameplay. The hover boots allow for way more control over your movement, which is nice, but they require a few button inputs to activate and properly utilize, and you can't shoot while using them, so they kind of feel gimmicky and only really come into play when the game flat out tells you to use them. Or as a glide substitute, since Clank's not with Ratchet for most of the game, which I actually find kinda disappointing. Doesn't feel like we get much of a chance to let Clank's absence sink in through the gameplay, you know? Since we can get by just fine without him. No, Clank, you rest your weary propellers, really, it's fine, I'm good. Speak of the Robo Boy, a Crack in Time also gives Clank gameplay a much needed shot in the arm. Clank's been playable in every main series entry exempting Deadlocked, but his gameplay hasn't drastically changed since the first game, though how annoying they get varies per game. All his bits are slower, more careful platforming segments, revolving around commanding AI companion characters, but A Crack in Time pushes this into a really interesting new direction in the form of time puzzles. By interacting with these time pads, Clank can record up to a minute of his own actions, then have that recorded movement carried out by a holographic past Clank. You can have up to 4 Clanks at once running around with different pathing, pressing different switches, and navigating the environment to get the present Clank through the exit. These puzzles are really cool, really clever, and quite possibly my favorite bits of the entire game. They're solid brain ticklers, forcing you to think in terms of past, present, and future, as you play around what you've done to enable the next Clank to push further, sometimes having to re-record past pathing to allow one Clank to continue their business while you in the present set up for shenanigans past that point. When explained verbally, it sounds like an absolute muddle, but it's all intuitive in-game, and the puzzle layouts themselves are concise enough that scenarios never get overwhelming. They're fun, never frustrating, and never rely on anything but your own creative thinking to be solved. Finally, Clank gets a gameplay that's a fittingly cerebral juxtaposition to Ratchet's fighty action style, instead of just being slower to come off as smarter. Love to see it. Of course, I think it's easy to forget that these puzzles aren't the entirety of what you do as Clank in this game. In fact, they don't even make up the majority. Most of what you're going to be doing as Clank is really simple platforming and twatting things with a big stick, which I think we've mastered that, Insomniac. We've been doing this for 7 years at this point. Also, you can do this. Ooh! There are other little tricks sprinkled throughout the games. There are now dialogue options and conversations with NPCs. I'm not sure why, especially in Quest for Booty, in which it literally never matters or there's only one right option anyway, so why even bother giving us the choice? Magical land of not my problem. What the hell? Why would Ratchet even say this? What are we doing here? Meanwhile, A Crack in Time has some slight side questery through a somewhat elaborate space exploration setup. Pretty chill as far as optional stuff goes, but I wouldn't rate it as super exciting, cause it's all featureless moons and the like. And it's kind of annoying when your story progression gets arbitrarily cup-checked every now and then to make you hit a doodling around quota. Probably the best ship gameplay in the series, but it's not like that's a hotly contested field. There's also that handful of constructo weapons I kind of talked about before. You can customize with these different firing modes, ammo styles, that kind of thing. It's only 3 weapons, so it's pretty superfluous, but, you know, kind of neat. Other than that, though, these games are pretty typical Ratchet fare, and I think that's part of what makes these games so much less remarkable to me. Put these games next to the PS2 ones, and that's about 7 years of basically the same gameplay. These future games pinched the cheeks of the formula, tousled the fringes, but didn't evolve or expand upon the core gameplay in any meaningful way. 7 years in, a whole new generation of hardware, best we can do is go through the same motions, and not even as well as we used to. To me, these games are fun, but ultimately fleeting. Without a strong narrative context or realized world building to make up for the lack of real innovation, so much of these games feel like style over substance that didn't actually add anything to the series, just made it prettier and more unnecessarily convoluted, and honestly, a lot blander. The weird thing is, though, had Insomniac actually lent into the older games instead of ignoring them for this weird quasi-soft reboot thing, they could have made something really special. You wouldn't even have to work that hard to make the connections to the previous tetralogy. Azimuth very stubbornly pursuing a single goal despite the risk of ignoring the bigger picture, Ratchet from the first game, anyone? Or thinking about themes like heritage when you have characters that literally come from nowhere, or were a mistake? Or even if they just lent more into some of the original ideas that came out of these future games. Imagine a full game styled after the Tomley Outpost or Gimlick Valley levels in A Crack in Time, in which you keep dipping into the past to change things up in the present to create a new way forward. Or maybe leaning more into the anomaly fixing thing, in which you can fix time anomalies to open up previously inaccessible secrets and areas. A little bit of A, a little bit of B, could have made for some really cool ways to interact with levels and shake up the classic Ratchet formula. But it seems like there was nothing scarier to Insomniac during this time than actually changing the classic Ratchet formula. I don't think it's any coincidence that this exact model of gameplay for these games was basically lifted directly out of the series' most acclaimed entry and virtually untouched across the whole series. It feels like there was more of a concern about Ratchet as a brand during this time, and when you think about it this way, the word sterilization comes to mind. By not making a point, the game doesn't run the risk of losing you or making you mad at it. By disconnecting from the previous game's plots, it's easier to have newer faces jump into the series. A bit of edge might turn some types off, but the kind of generic hero story we're working with here, wacky good time fun, it's appetizing to the broad majority. But in losing that edge, you lose any chance of digging into the skin, you know? You're not gonna leave any impression behind. It really wouldn't have taken much effort to have it both ways. Like I said, the connections are possible, they are there, just begging to be made. Just goes to show, if you're hyper-focused on external contexts and audience reactions, the story you're telling is gonna suffer without any meaning unto itself. The end results, an unfortunately tepid close to the PS3 escapades of a once proud duo. Unless... I feel like a lot of people don't remember this one, perhaps because it released in late 2013, literally days before the PlayStation 4. Hard to imagine how it got overshadowed. It's also not a very big game, being an epilogue of sorts to the Future Trilogy, but for being more of an after-dinner snack, a snack it is indeed. This is easily the best Ratchet game on PS3. The weirdly wonderful thing about Nexus is that despite being a third the size of the mainline Future games, it actually does the classic formula more right than any of those games did. What's this? I could go this way? Or another? Wait, I think I remember, don't tell me. It's branching. Branching paths. Multiple destinations without clarity on which one's the right one. Villains that actually make you piss yourself. Thematic content? Excitement? I didn't think they had it in them, but they did it. They made another PS2-ass Ratchet game. Now, it's not just Nexus being more like a PS2 Ratchet game. It's part of it, but it's also how Nexus iterates and tweaks the formula in new ways that actually evolve the experience and curate a much finer feel. The default control scheme blends a happy medium between lock strafe and manual aiming, most notably by having firing focusing on where the camera is pointing instead of Ratchet's body. It's minor, but contributes to a much silkier flow by not having to micromanage Ratchet so much. Yes, finally someone gets it! Controlling Ratchet in this game is so effortless. Be it in combat or in the platforming, you have complete freedom of laser-precise movement, leaving nothing flying in the face of your focus as you fight off flocks of felonious foes. Fun! The weapons you have to hand follow the same oopsies and poopsies as you'd find in the other games, but they have new twists on them that suit the game's decidedly horror-leaning tone. Like, instead of hypnotizing enemies with Disco Fever, LOL Random, you have the Nightmare Box that'll terrify any enemy in range, and I do mean any enemy. I love the way the final boss reacts to it. At first I thought the snowman gun was a little too off-kilter, but then I realized it's literally giving your enemies the chills. Don't know if that was intentional, but I thought it was pretty great. On the whole, your arsenal feels like it has a decent sense of thematic and aesthetic unity, which I think goes without saying the older games had in spades, while the future games never quite managed. The main new trick up Nexus's sleeve is gravity, most specifically realized through a gravity tether that can connect 2 points with a directional gravity well. Contextual as it might seem, the game actually makes good use of the mechanic through various environmental puzzles involving multiple wells and clever secrets for those willing to get creative with them, as well as the occasional intersection with the combat to make for some fun scenarios that actually change the odd enemy encounter. This is also the game that introduced the jetpack to the series. Not the reboot, this game. Perhaps the single best addition to the series in a decade, this game gave it to us. It's a jetpack. What do you want me to say? It's a jetpack. When has a jetpack ever not made a game 100 times cooler? Look at me, I'm flying around, big open levels, getting in dogfights, finding cool secrets. Friggin' jetpack, what do you need me for? It explains itself. Nexus even does the hover boots better than A Crack in Time. No more press the button, turn them on, then another go faster, return the key. Do you want to use the hover boots? Then press the button to use the hover boots. Such a delectable degree of mobility and control pumping through combat that's both frantic and uniquely balletic, crossed with some simple but stylish physics puzzles. That's some good game. Meanwhile, Clank's levels have been entirely revamped. No longer 3D think-em-ups, Nexus's Clank segments are 2D platforming bits that let you switch the direction of gravity using the right stick, which many have compared to the style of indie hit VVV. They're probably the only example of Clank gameplay in the series that manages to maintain the rest of its game's brisk pace while also being distinct in and of itself, and I find them pretty fun. They're not so much puzzles, nor are they among the game's highlights, truthfully, but having to retrace your way through a labyrinthine stage you might have gotten through purely on reaction time alone, while an unstoppable monster chomps at your heels, it hits the right way. But as I seem to have implicitly tipped my hand towards the complaint plate, I shall continue to tip further. While Nexus absolutely crushes the gameplay side of things, the rest of the package can sometimes be a bit pokey. For as strongly as the story starts with a well-paced and memorable introduction, a legitimately creepy atmosphere, fun character moments, and some neat mic drops, the game fumbles said mic come the end by stampeding towards a fairly tepid resolution. Ironically, it's when the game starts resembling a more typical Ratchet style and setting that it starts losing itself a bit. And as a de facto epilogue, the story's more into waxing reflexive than pushing out anything new. But at any rate, the story does better than the actual future games in that it shows a willingness to embrace previous game stories and comment on them instead of downright ignore them.
Can you imagine seeing your kind right there, close enough to touch, but impossible to reach?
Yeah, not very subtly, but still. It makes this Ratchet feel a lot more realized as a character when his actual actionable past is re-examined and rationalized. And it makes the series feel that little bit more complete. A weary Ratchet breaking down into laughter at the ending speaks volumes as to where this game's head is at, and it's a nice place. Well, nice, until you meet the big bad guy. Look at this dude. He's straight up Bloodborne. Absolute unit, gone too soon. Relatedly, outside the aforementioned pacing problems, I don't know if I consider Nexus's length an inherent weak point. Like Deadlocked, the game's more limited space lends itself to a tighter focus and more appetizing replayability. But I'd say we're towing the line here on how many repeat visits we're expected for a mere 5-planet campaign. Without any grinding, it'll take partway through the third playthrough to get all your gear fully kitted, with most of it coming down to cobbling together Raritanium for some measly stat upgrades instead of anything more substantial or exciting. Oh yeah, the stat-based Raritanium upgrade system is back, as is the through-use system, Natch, but I'm actually not that down on either this time around. Weapons only go up to a third level, with new Raritanium upgrades becoming available each level, which tips the scales just enough that it feels like it's the Raritanium stuff that matters more. And most of the weapons have upgrades available that allow them to earn more bolts, Raritanium, etc., which will obviously help you level up everything else faster, so overall it feels like there's more of a reason to keep using weapons after leveling them. Plus, the offered upgrades feel marginally more impactful in actually changing up the weapons as opposed to the proper future games, which were basically, look, it's blue now, woo! I'm not gonna pretend like I suddenly love these systems now, but something about the way Nexus handles them just works for me. Same middling meal, but at least a fair bit of unnecessary fat has been trimmed. There are a few things that the proper future games definitively have on this one, though. Being stuck with only one single save slot isn't very cash money, I tell you what, and the game only runs at 30 frames per second. But even if that means having to take a shower after every session with the game, it's a worthwhile price in my eyes. Into the Nexus manages to simultaneously call back to classic aspects of the original PS2 Ratchet games, while also pushing things forward to not only give itself a unique gameplay identity, but also polish the existing formula to an immaculate shine, making for one of the most singularly addictive experiences in the series behind maybe Deadlocked. Nexus doesn't feel like a Ratchet game that was made because the finance department said we needed a Ratchet game. It feels like a game made by people who wanted to make a game, and I feel like that's the big distinction. It's the quintessence of what makes the Ratchet series great, condensed in a lovely little shot. It could be longer, it could be more sharply dressed, it won't be what saves my marriage, but it's more proudly and definitively a solid conclusion to this series than the future games were. And the only truly bad thing I have to say about it is that this game coming out so late in the Ratchet series means I can't write off any other future games quite yet. Before you ask, yes, I did skip the spin-off games. There's really not much worth saying about either of these games, truthfully. All for One's a decent enough co-op game, I guess, but its mechanics are limited and its story pretty hokey, so it's a pretty easy skip-a-rooney. Meanwhile, Full Frontal Assault sucks. A tower defense game in which your defenses can't do shit. Where do I sign up? Yeah, I know it gave us the sublime control scheme that Nexus uses, but that's the only good thing about it. I can appreciate Insomniac actually trying new things and getting experimental, but, could have tried a little harder. That'd have been cool too, trying a little harder. But none of that matters, because literally days after Nexus, once again the Ratchet series faced another generational leap. With the promise of a sleek new console stubbornly against backwards compatibility, an opportunity was presented to slather the slate clean and retool Ratchet for a whole new next-gen crowd. How'd it go? here we are. I don't know what to say. What can I say? What hasn't already been said about the disappointment that was and is the Ratchet & Clank reboot? Prettier mouths than mine have gnawed this game's jugular so thoroughly, nary a drop has gone untasted and pontificated about for 30 minutes plus. The Ratchet & Clank reboot is it. Like all of my criticisms of the series up to this point, this is the apotheosis. The sterilization, the loss of character, the LOL random are you laughing yet desperation, it's all here and it's all at its most tiresome. Despite posturing itself as a remake or reimagining, every aspect the 2016 game cannibalizes from the 2002 original has been watered down or misappropriated to the point of being literally the opposite.
I've died and gone to nerd heaven.
Nerd. I like him.
No longer a clever sci-fi yarn about two opposites needing to attract for the betterment of a universe blighted by obsessive consumerism, the reboot reintroduces Ratchet & Clank as two generally compatible nice guys, stopping a bad guy, cause bad guys are bad guys, with the story barely even about them when it's stuffed in on all sides by a glut of celebrity voices and useless characters, siphoning away whatever drama the incessant and terrible humor hasn't already suckled up. All of the grit, the sass, characterization, and complexity has been flattened as far as they can squish to fit a shallow, glittery facade, wrapped around as bare bones and underwhelming a hero narrative as they come. Strung along by gameplay that doesn't so much streamline as do the exact bare minimum, leaving behind naught but a product that is emphatically weaker than its source material in every way that isn't visual.
But you already knew that.
I am not the first, nor the last, but I'm possibly the prettiest fan of the original Ratchet & Clank to break out the old Premiere Pro and have a go at over-explaining how painfully this remake misses the point, really points plural, of the 2002 classic on which it claims to be based. Tearing this game apart has basically become a YouTube subculture in its own right. Where do you want to start? Ratchet & Clank automatically being pals? Quark's scuffed character arc? Pop culture over consumerist culture? Ratchet's freaking ugly armor set! How many times have you seen that nerd comparison alone? You know what? One more time just for luck.
I've died and gone to nerd heaven.
Nerd. I like him.
Never gets old. So you know what? I'm not doing it. I can't. There have just been too many unfavorable comparisons between the original Ratchet & Clank and this reboot that if I go down that road, there's nothing I can meaningfully add to conversation. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do instead. This showed up on my nightstand earlier. I don't know what's in this. I don't know who put it there. I don't know what it is. But I'm gonna drink it. I'm gonna hope that it makes me forget everything about the Ratchet & Clank series up to this point, so we can talk about this reboot solely on its own merits, because trust me, there's enough to talk about just on those alone. I'm not gonna talk about the original game. I'm not gonna talk about the future sub-series. We are going into this as objectively as possible. Ratchet who? Do we understand each other? We good? Alright. See you on the other side. Wait. Spoilers. For everything. The game, everything. Just, you probably already guessed that. Okay. Cheers. Mm-hmm. Whew. Not getting the deposit back? Oh, no, sir. Last time I paid $5 for... What? Is that a colorful animal jump game? I love jump games. Let's play it. Today, I'm going to talk about a game called Rondo and Robot. That's what it's called. Anyway, the story of Rondo and Robot begins with this little guy, Rondo. Rondo wants to be a big hero, specifically as part of some team of hero types, these Galactic Rangers, led by this here green guy. Rondo goes through their tryout obstacle course thing and all, but then they tell him, no hero for you. And then he goes home all sad. Oh. Meanwhile, a triptych of tricky bastards are building some sort of evil robot army for some typical up-to-no-goodery. When will they learn? Looking to destroy them some planets, they is. Randomly, the assembly line pops out a diminutive defect who we'll call Robot, for that's what he is, who isn't chill with the destruction agenda and makes his escape. He's shot down and crashes onto Rondo's planet, where he gets fixed up by Rondo and he tells him all about the impending no-goodery. Robot wants to take matters to the Galactic Rangers, and Rondo convinces Robot to let him chauffeur based on a lie that he's actually good friends with the Rangers. Chicanery! Oh! gross! But Robot buys it, so, off we go. Then, literally about 5 minutes later, they find the Rangers, and it's made abundantly clear that Rondo was lying about knowing them. But that doesn't really matter, since neither of them ever bring it up again. In fact, after this point, Rondo and Robot barely have a direct conversation together. The Rangers finally let Rondo join up, and I guess Robot just goes with him. I don't even know why they stick together, honestly. That's pretty much it between them. And that strikes me as odd. This is kinda odd, right? I mean, the game's clearly called Rondo and Robot, which might make you think that it might, be about them? But no, they're pretty much strangers, with all the explosive chemistry of an alive toad sitting on a dead toad.
We gotta get to Iridia.
Agreed.
In terms of the plot, Robot's basically out of the game as soon as he and Rondo find the Rangers, i.e. 5 minutes after he's introduced. He just keeps showing up, taking up screen space like he's gunning for a day wage. Holy crap, behind you, Rondo, he's coming, look out! Okay, tell a lie, they do have one conversation after Rondo runs home crying after making his first big boo-boo. One that wasn't even really his, but whatever. And Robot's all like, there, little baby boy. Whew, take it all back. There's no separating these two. Best friends for life. Why? Why call the game this? Why not just call it Rondo, or Robot, or even call it Green Guy? Green Guy's one of the first characters we're introduced to. He gets the last line of the script. He even has a sort of arc or something, in which he's jealous of Rondo, but only kind of, and learns a lesson, but not really. He's got a bigger case for main character than either of these two wet towels. Look at that searing emotion. These two are feeling it. Such rich interiority to explore.
Oh my. This assembly line is the place of my creation. I am experiencing many conflicting feelings.
I don't like any of the characters. And I'll bet me saying that hurts this game's widow feelings, but it's true. And partly what makes me dislike them even more. So much of this game just reeks of desperation to be liked by everyone. No one's got any edge. Rondo's a boring little shit with the most pathetically average motivation possible. I want to be a hero. Isn't that just so friggin' precious? And that's all his character is. I want to be a good guy doing good things. I mean, yeah, get in line. And then in his career of constant success, one thing goes wrong and his heroic response is to go home and cry about it until Robot comes over all like, "It's okay, baby." And then he's back at it again within the minute. Completely bland, completely characterless, but you can't say anything bad about him, can't you? Everyone will like him because he's so nice, right? And then there's Green Guy, who just straight up betrays Rondo and the good guys, literally putting the fate of the galaxy in jeopardy because of his bruised ego, but it's okay because he's immediately sorry right afterwards because he's really a nice guy, you guys, really. See, all's forgiven.
Hey, you coming?
Somehow. The villains too, there's like 3 main bad guys and none of them feel like serious threats. Oh, but if they were threatening, people may not like them. People don't like serious grumblepusses, they like wacky, they like memes. Oh, look at this shifty britches, huh? Looks like we got ourselves a real sussy amogus on our hands, isn't that right, fellow gamers? Let's hand him that LFTW. Would you like to buy a plush toy? This leads to a particularly bizarre ludonarrative dissonance in that the game's cutscenes are all about how fluffy and wonderful and hopeful little Rondo is, and then the gameplay is all about him aggressively mowing down legions of thinking, breathing life forms with flamethrowers and rocket launchers and the exact opposite of things that are good for making friends. In fact, I think Rondo has a higher body count than the main bad guys. Like, significantly higher. Business bad guy destroys a planet, but the game craps out a line like, "Good thing all 14 million billion people who live there left in time."
The Novalians were able to evacuate in time, but billions lost their homes.
The evacuation of Novalis was successful. No one was killed or injured.
So I don't actually think we see him kill anyone this entire game. Apparently he destroys more planets than the one, but we don't see it, and apparently the possibility is very real that everyone happened to be on vacation at the exact same time or something, so I don't know, who knows. And Stallone bad guy sure as hell ain't killing anyone.
Water!
I guess we watched Pickle Rick bad guy turn a guy into a sheep once. Does that count? Are we counting that? What does that make? 1? 1 kill shared amongst 3 big bads? Meanwhile, Rondo's past his big old fuzzy ears and charred corpses before the 4th friggin' planet. But it's okay, cause we're the good guys. When we do it, it's adorable. It's wacky. Get back to blasting. Which I suppose is a good enough segue into talking about the gameplay as I'm gonna get. I guess, broadly speaking, Rondo and Robot is a third-person shooter with a jump button. You go through a level, a bunch of enemies pop up, you talk them out of staying for dessert by using a series of very loud plasma-based counter-arguments. I mentioned the jump button because jumping out of the way of incoming bullets is really the only evasive measure you can take, and sometimes the main path gets broken up a bit by making you do some hopping and a skipping and the sort, especially when you're playing as Robot. Overall, simple stuff, and yeah, it's pretty fun. Rondo controls like a dream, and the game really pushes it with how many enemies it pits you against, leading to plenty of pulse-pounding bouts of gunplay. You're gonna have to pay attention, but one of the biggest risks is simply overthinking things. Shoot the boom-booms at the man-mans! So it's a good middle ground, and nestles nicely in that tricky enough to demand attention, but simple enough to zone out sweet spot. By the end of the game, your arsenal positively balloons with loads of wild weapons for an almost overwhelming amount of options. As soon as you think you got one thing down, the game always skitters something new across your plate, so yeah, that's something. Though I don't like how many of the weapons seem to fall into the category of just throw it out and forget it. About the most complicated strategy you can pull off is by throwing out all the weapon types that automatically fire themselves, then mashing the fire button on some other weapon until you need to replace the automatic ones. While I wouldn't say the game gets unfun, it also doesn't take too long to settle into a well-trodden rut when the sole engagement is just jumping back and forth, mashing fire. I think a little bit more room for deeper synergy would have gone a long way. There's also a lean towards silliness with the weapons, which doesn't pay off all the time. I guess I just don't get why the shotgun has to make enemies all pixely, that kind of thing. But hey, I can't think of any other video game in which you can hypnotize enemies into dancing as a viable method of combat, so at least they got that nice little bit of mental real estate. Another thing I don't like is how weapons upgrade. It's easy enough. Use the weapon, and then the weapon gains experience. You get enough experience and the weapon levels up to a max level of 5, at which point it gains a silly new moniker and additional function. And I don't like this system because it means the primary incentive for using weapons isn't because they're cool, it's because you need to fill up its bar with numbers. You spend all this time with a weapon to unlock its exotic and transformative function, catching in on a bunch of extra stat upgrades for it, only to decide that you don't want to play with it anymore because you have a PP blaster you haven't filled up yet. Yeah, you can still use the maxed out weapons, but that won't get the rest of your kit leveled. There's incentivizing variety, and then there's making the way we use the tools we're given feel completely artificial. Ugh! I'm sorry, that was weird. Anyway. Now, while there are a lot of levels that essentially function as big hallways that just have you trundling along, shooting everything in the way, the game actually comes alive every now and then by throwing some forks into the path. Nothing too schmancy, but it's nice when it happens. The branches offer plenty of nicely curated obstacle courses, so to speak, which keep things interesting and make the places we visit feel that much more sprawling. One of my favorite planets is Gaspan? Whatever, the red one that opens up with a pretty typical linear path. But then you reach the end and then you get a jetpack, and now all of a sudden the entire map is this really explorable sandbox. It's a really cool idea, and I kinda wish more levels were like this, giving you reasons to mosey around, turning over the rocks. The game is gorgeous, and while I wouldn't claim that exploring and getting all up in said gorgeousness is in any way discouraged or goes unrewarded, there's a distinct lack of mystique. The line gets drawn super thick. Anything even partway off the required path gets a big optional flag on it, which is really off-putting to me. To know before even setting foot on a planet exactly what I'm in for and exactly how much of it apparently doesn't matter, it's strange. It's like the game trying to make sure you're not planning on spending any more time in a level than what's absolutely necessary. Stick to the itinerary, people! Everything from the level music on up is all, go, 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 rush me, let's go! Even the quiet moments don't stay quiet for long, because there are no quiet moments in this game. Because it doesn't matter what you're doing, even if it's nothing at all, there's going to be someone talking.
She hates everything.
And talking. And talking. And talking. And for all this talking, you think the game would be better at it.
Are you just hungry? Because when this is over, I can go for some food. Like a cheeseburger or some space pizza.
Is this a joke? Why is this guy talking to me right now?
You got a lot of raritanium. But come see me and let's do some upgrades.
Oh, this is an open channel? Oh, okay, that means I just didn't know that. I guess that's fine.
A tripad lock. In order to bypass it, the duo would have to quickly activate all 3 pressure pads.
Oh, now the ceiling's in on this? Come on! Also, spoilers, what the H? That and many other little insistences made contribute to the feeling that this game is some sort of helicopter parent. Constantly worried you're gonna get lost and stop playing it in frustration, or if you get a moment's pause, you'll use it to think about something other than it. So it's constantly jumping up and down in your face and pulling you by the arm to make sure your attention doesn't lapse. Case in point, every now and then the action gets interrupted by this puzzle minigame, and the game is so anxious you won't like it that you're flat out given the option to skip it. Now that's just pathetic, game. It was your idea to have this. Do you want me to do it or not? Yes, no, I don't know, do you love me yet? The kicker is, the gameplay is smooth and the environments, well, the ones that aren't big metal hallways, are quite lush. I could get into this if the game would just get off my friggin' back.
Of course, Ratchet knew he'd have to surface to breathe.
That and the insipidly clean story puts across this impression that the game has absolutely no intrinsic eye whatsoever. It's not about the game itself, it's about what you think of it. This game so much feels like a product. All this game cares about is being liked. Being liked by everyone and anyone. But that's impossible. It is literally impossible to make something that absolutely no one is going to dislike. Chasing that status only turns you into an empty pot full of nothing stew. We're a game about brutal running gun violence, starring a runaway mascot from a children's book about how you can do anything. We burp out 1,000 words per square second, but we're not saying anything. We're making jokes that are probably funny, right? Since people repeated them a lot 5 years ago. Do a barrel roll? It's really the context that kills it. Needless to say, the day gets saved, but the way there gets downright jumbled as troves of random nobody characters get shuffled into the folds, and the game starts hopping from villain to villain despite giving literally none of them the proper time of day. The bad guy, that ends up being the bad guy, the final boss, has only been visible on screen for about 2.5 minutes before the final boss fight actually starts. I timed it. And for the majority of those cutscenes, Rondo and Robot aren't even there seeing him, so what, they've seen him for about maybe 10 seconds, by my estimate? Oh, what a twisty twist. Turns out the baddest guy of all was this guy you barely noticed. Whoa! Plus, he's not even the one that just established a beef with Rondo. That's the one that gets sheeped. You don't even let Rondo settle his score? You have some chuckle nut we don't even know do it? What even is dramatic pacing? What excitement is there really in a hero story in which the hero basically gets a free ride just for being a cutie? Or a buddy story in which the two characters are chill from moment one and barely notice each other since. Or a redemption arc that starts and ends within the same minute. Everything about the story, by design, is about as deep and engaging as an empty kiddie pool. And when it's not being tiresome, it's being pandering, which makes the game feel just completely washed out. And that's not to say fun gameplay alone isn't worth anything, because it is, but still, there's something inherently meaningless about Rondo and Clank. It's not entirely unoriginal, but it pulls so many of its punches that it doesn't make much impact. And honestly, the gameplay could be better. It very much feels like a junk food game. Fun in the moment, but it won't leave you with anything. Gameplay's good, but themes, story, that's what makes it stick. That's what rolls around in your mind years later. And where that intersects with gameplay, that's how you get the real au jus, you know? You don't need to be profound, you just need to put in the work. And Ratchet and Robot just lacks the conviction to tell a story that carries any meaning unto itself. Wait, Rondo and... what was it called? Wait. I remember now. Nefarious is an adjective denoting actions or activities that's wicked or criminal. That's why the villain's named that. Wait, I remember the wrong thing. What were we talking about? Oh right, how the Ratchet and Clank reboot completely bastardizes the original title by sanding down its themes, charm, spirit, characters, complexity, and narrative until becoming as hollow and fake as the culture the series once took the piss out of, effectively rendering it as the subject of its own ridicule. That's right. Wait, is that right? What day is it? How did you get this number? Well, there you have it. The Ratchet and Clank reboot. Quite arguably one of the lowest points in the series' history. No more wit. No more grace, no further aspiration than silly sci-fi, and not even doing that particularly well. Barring a few very specific exceptions, the only times the reboot really comes alive are when it's borrowing from the 2002 game. And like I said way back in the PS2 video, what makes the original Ratchet & Clank so zesty is how it all comes together, how every piece informs the whole and vice versa. The reboot has no whole meaning. It is a game that fundamentally misunderstands its source material. It is an empty game. It is a toothless, generic, our product here of a game that's too busy insecurely chasing validation rather than earning it. It is, unequivocally, a disappointment, and a smear on the series' good name. Unless... No, just, no unless, just, this is just... blech. And don't even get me started on the film. Shocker! A story stuffed with useless characters and weak manufactured drama made for a pretty poor showing in a medium in which that's all you got. Actually, believe it or not, the game ends up being the better way the story gets told, because at least it accidentally has some form of pacing. Take a mission in the game, in which you start with a cutscene explaining how we have to get the thing. Then you play the mission, and then at the end you have the cutscene of getting to the thing. The film just outright cuts out that middle part. We have to get the thing! And then like 30 seconds later, we found the thing! It's like a puppy about to piss itself because it can't get its third puppuccino. Shit, slow down! Half the cutscenes in the game are literally taken right out of the film too, hence this gentle warning message that pops up every time you cough too loudly. But for some reason, a lot of them are edited super abruptly in the game.
Greetings, cadet.
We gotta move.
Yeah, there are no winners here. Like, okay. Is this game pure malevolence pressed onto a disc? The worst possible thing ever conceived in any playable format? No. Like, 100% no. Especially when you compare it to other PS4 era exclusives, it's actually pretty refreshing. If you have no pre-existing stock in Ratchet & Clank as a series, most of what I've groused about probably won't even register to you. You could do a lot worse than this. Who knows? Maybe this game has done for a whole new generation what the original Ratchet & Clank did for me. And if that's the case, fantastic. Really. Who am I to say what's right and wrong to like? To find a game that really resonates for you, it's a special thing. And if this is that game for you, then I'm happy you found it. Fact is, if this game had just been another bland entry in the Ratchet series, I'd probably be much kinder to it. But it wasn't that. It took this existing game, this wonderful, clever game, and stripped it of everything but its name, and then had the nerve to try and claim this vapid new guff was in any way equivalent to what we once had. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't at all have this old man yells at cloud attitude in me, bemoaning how these kids aren't experiencing the real Ratchet. And for a good long while, this is where the story ended. Disappointment, underperformance, but also overperformance, leading to lots of uncertainty regarding how or if the series would move on. I mean, we kinda dropped all our eggs into this reinvention game, which just ended up setting PlayStation's film aspirations back half a decade. Do we really want to continue off that? But can you go back when the old stuff is still virtually inaccessible to your new audience? What's to be done here? Something's gotta give somewhere. Finally, 5 years after the reboot, the longest gap between releases the Ratchet & Clank series has ever seen, assuming you're counting spin-offs, of course, we got our answer. So what happens next? Does Rift Apart make good on past misgivings and return to form in a grand fashion? Does it actually give more Missly than before? Sweet Eye of Azoni, what of Lawrence? I ask you, what? All of this will finally tackle... Right now, let's go! You know, I don't even know what I was expecting. Just the logo alone. Just by the friggin' logo, I could tell this wasn't gonna be it. Look at this logo. This clean-ass, Apple-ass logo. What does this tell you about the game? Exactly. There's no character. There's no style. It's boilerplate, our product here. And I can't think of anything more emblematic of the Ratchet & Clank series in this day and age. Let's get to the most pressingly turgid question at hand. Is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart better than the reboot? Yes. Is it better than the Future sub-series? Yes, on some accounts. Has the game sufficiently revived my faith in this series getting its act together? Not on your life, matey. What you have to understand about the Ratchet & Clank series is that the original vision has gone. It's gone home, curled up in a little ball, and gone to sleep. The last game in the series to make any sort of thematic point came out 16 freaking years ago. To expect the series to suddenly snap awake and revert back to its old self would be like expecting a horse's ass to dispense chicken salad, with all the grapes thinly sliced no less. At this point, I'm not looking for the old Ratchet series anymore. I'm looking for the series to focus on some new direction with enough confidence that it evokes the same feelings of awe and inspiration the series once offered, while remaining reverent to that original vision. Is that too much to ask? But the big issue underlying the Ratchet & Clank series to this very day is how it still trades off aspects of that original vision without truly understanding it, or in worst cases, disregarding it entirely. It makes it feel like we're only experiencing a half rather than a nice juicy whole, or, to wit, the series watered down to its barest components. And unfortunately, Rift Apart is the latest in the Ratchet & Clank series spiral of misfires, but I hasten to remind y'all that despite my yammering suggesting the contrary, none of these games discussed here are explicitly bad. Well, Quest for Booty's no Summer Plum, And the spin-offs are pretty drecky. Whatever. Point being, as objective products, even the worst of the bunch are perfectly competent, technically sound video games with a decent core gameplay loop and some funnies that might make you exhale from the nostrils. Speaking to objectivity, Rift Apart is among the more competently handled offerings in the Ratchet series. If I had to rank the games, I would insert Rift Apart right between Up Your Arsenal and Tools of Destruction, and to the standard Ratchet fan, that probably sounds amazing. But let's be honest with ourselves. This far in, are you really expecting the perspective of a standard Ratchet fan? So let's just drop the formalities and get into discussing why exactly this game, to me, is a big old resounding blech, and why this feels like an unfortunate last stop situation. As it would happen, the story of Rift Apart doesn't follow up on the 2016 reboot, but instead follows the events of Into the Nexus, a fact it is outright celebrating, and I am with it. Bon voyage, boring reboot continuity! Into the wastebasket of history with you! We're back in prime time now! So what's for breakfast, Rift Apart? I'm ready. Dr. Nefarious is back, and he's got a big— Stop. I can't do this. Look, Dr. Nefarious is easily the best villain in the series. I don't think there's any argument he isn't. Yeah, he's not as thematic as characters like Drek, but there's something to be said about a character that's just fun to watch. And Nefarious's mania is always a blast to behold. I think they overdid him a bit in A Crack in Time, truthfully, but him being there made sense enough, cause he never truly died, just ended up on an asteroid. And though his motive there was really convoluted, his involvement at least gave a sense of continuity connecting the older games to the future ones. But he was pretty thoroughly given the business at the end of A Crack in Time. It made for a nice punctuation mark for the series, and it just feels like that impact is delegitimized a bit, you know? It's just gonna keep coming back like it's all some big Saturday morning cartoon. Which, you know, yeah, I know, it is cartoony, wacky sci-fi. Yeah, he probably could bounce back from that. And I know All For One did the same thing, but the day I turned to All For One as a narrative figurehead for the Ratchet series is the day turnips fly out of my butt and Nintendo releases me as the next Animal Crossing. I'm probably the only one who even cares. Oh, it's fine, whatever, it's fine. Lawrence is back, it's fine. What? No, Lawrence isn't back. What the heck? How are you gonna bring back Nefarious but not Lawrence? You can't just drop the straight man foil and expect the kooky shouty crazy to work just as well. Now he just looks foolish. Weep not for his absence, but give thanks for that he ever was. Rest easy, brother. And if that's not bad enough.
The Hall of Heroes is safe.
Wait, that didn't happen in the original game. The Hall of Heroes wasn't even part of the series until the reboot. No, don't tell me you're trying to retcon in the reboot. Why? Sure, it brought in new fans, but you couldn't have picked a moment it shared with the original? Or just talk about defeating Drek? Or screw it, just make a sequel to the reboot. Why? But also, where? Are you pretending that was the first game? Did any of the PS2 games happen? Are we pretending they did? Are we caught up? You have literally no reason to be shoving in the reboot like this. While writing this script, I stepped back and asked myself, why do I care? Should I care? Continuity is like having separate pockets for your phone and your wallet. It's kind of hard to explain exactly why you need it, and maybe you don't. World will probably keep spinning without it. Hell, some of my favorite games fudge existing continuity, but at least they did it with purpose. What's really annoying here is that half the dialogue between Ratchet and Clank is all, wow, we're such good friends. We've been through so much. You're my best buddy, guy. While Insomniac seems to be actively trying to erase the moments in which they actually became friends. They were against the odds, they worked for it. It was meaningful, it was real. Friends don't just, I like you, you like me. We are friends forever. They get under each other's skin, they poke at each other. They get deeper than that. You should be calling back to the original and appreciating how far the duo's relationship has come, not acting like they were never even slightly mean to each other. You take those moments away, you take away the reason their friendship matters. You know what? Maybe it doesn't matter. None of it. Maybe I'm the only one who cares. Maybe I'm even reading this wrong, and I'm getting worked up over a cheeky Easter egg or something. I just hate to see a good story be neglected. Ratchet and Clank was always special to me because you saw them become friends. It wasn't preordained or automatic. I hate how Insomniac flipped it for the reboot, and I hate the idea that that is the way they think Ratchet and Clank should become friends. It's boring, it's shallow, and it's honestly insulting to me, all the fans of the original, and the legacy Insomniac games pretends to celebrate. Boy, not even 10 minutes in, I haven't even gotten to the part in which I glossed the plot, and I'm already more pissed off than I've ever been in any other video. Oh, this is gonna be a long one, isn't it? Okay, so Dr. Whatever's back. Yay. He steals something they call a Dimensionator, but doesn't really look like one, so I guess they're expanding the brand. Ratchet decides to shoot it for some reason. I mean, hey, fair play. He actually does something. Lord knows how much crap could have been avoided in the future games had Ratchet not just stood there like a dumbass. So, step in the right direction. Maybe next time, don't shoot the thing with control over dimensions? You lunatic? Anyway, Ratchet shoots the thing and the dimensions make like me when an attractive stranger tries to flirt and just completely break down. Which isn't that huge a problem, I guess. Not until that. Did you ever see that Phineas and Ferb movie, Across the Second Dimension? Picture that, but with Nefarious instead of the Schmerz. That's kind of the situation here. It's a new dimension in which a much more capable Emperor Nefarious has successfully made everything as beautiful as him. And, significantly, Ratchet and Clank get separated in this strange new world. Yep, we're doing another Ratchet or Clank thing. We're barely one level in. Why do I feel like someone's bingo card has already been filled? Fortunately, Clank lands at the feet of the game's second main character, a female Lombax by the name of Rivet, who in this dimension is the resistance movement against Nefarious. You better make room for 2 new recruits, cause it's gonna take more than one hero to put a stop to this dimension-crashing hullabaloo and save the universes. That's right, plural this time. I feel like right out of the gate, Rift Apart misses its broadest stroke. This multiverse setup, the conceit upon which this whole affair is predicated, it kinda doesn't matter. There's not much, if anything, that distinguishes the Rivet dimension from the proper Ratchet one, save for like 3 characters and a lot of palette swaps. And isn't that the bottom line when it comes to alternate universe stories? Or just using the word alternate, making the universes feel different? It took me until just now to realize that Nefarious City, the first proper area you play through as Ratchet, is probably meant to be a Nefarified version of the intro location. Which, sidebar, I thought was meant to be Megapolis from Going Commando, only to learn that it's actually some new place called Megalopolis, for some reason, because it's the only place in the game there's any transformation emphasized in being, you know, another dimension. Like, Rivet takes Clank to Sargasso, and it's not like some nefarious takeover Sargasso, it's just Sargasso. Straight up, tools of destruction Sargasso. Well, on the one hand, I'll grant it's nice it actually looks like Sargasso. They didn't just slap the name on Metal Corridor Planet 378. On the other hand, it's underwhelming. It's the same place as before. If the theme of Rivet's dimension is meant to be Nefarious 1, why do so few of the planets we visit actually follow that theme? Why bring back planets like this if you're not gonna give them a twist? We have weapons we have back home that work the same way. Pirates show up, what might as well be the pirates we fought plenty of times in Tools and Booty. Only this game could take a concept as wide open for creativity as multiple dimensions and use it to just do the PS3 era again shinier. World building in this series has been consistently MIA since the PS2 days, but its absence is particularly felt in Rift Apart. There isn't even a real resistance. I didn't misspeak earlier when I called Rivet the Resistance, cause she's pretty much it. Okay, let's see. There's a voice in Rivet's head during the very first scene. There's Rivet, this dimension's variant on recursive series bro dude Skid McMarks, who hooks Ratchet up with a new ship. Between the penchant for disguise and the hacktivism, it seems safe to say Black Ops are his speciality. I think Miss Zircon counts too. Then there are a couple headshots here of characters we never see, and finally, new universe Quark. Did I get everyone? Maybe Pepe Le Pew? I don't know. I don't even think the writers know. This is a sci-fi dystopia, so there's a resistance. So long as Rivet does hero things, who cares? Honestly, this whole multiverse thing almost feels like one big contrivance, so the writers could get themselves out of the corner they put themselves in, and bring in a new female protagonist, which, yeah, not an ignoble goal, all about it. But funnily enough, the aspect of the game I think suffers most from this, let's say tenuous relationship with the alternate dimension thing, is Rivet. There's work put in to frame her as her own character, but then there's also these pretensions that she has to be like Ratchet, since she's his dimensional counterpart or something, and so she just ends up having the same character as Ratchet, which is to say no character at all. You'd think for a multiverse story, part of the fun would be developing a yin for Ratchet's yang, or at the least a funky dance remix of his personality, not just making Ratchet but a girl. It's kinda what they do though. They even go and rope Rivet into the same, oh wow, I'm the last Lombax shtick they've rung Ratchet through ad infinitum. And I gotta ask, is it worth it? All this work just to make the same character you already have? They're interchangeable. 90% of Rivet scenes, you could sub in Ratchet and they would make just as much sense. Speaking of which, after completing the tutorial levels as Ratchet, the game then switches you over to Rivet, escorting Clank over to her hideout on Sargasso. You might notice right away as Rivet that you have literally everything you did while playing as Ratchet. Weapons, bolts, XP, everything down to the overdue library books. And that's not a glitch or anything. That's just how the game is. Everything you do, all of your progression, all of your inventory, all of your abilities, both characters share. Yeah, it's really weird. Weapons I guess I could get since the weapons vendor sounds like a tiddly ant trying to fix the two Lombaxes up with one another.
This wasn't what was in my account last time.
That is because I added our mutual friend on Nefarious City.
But later, Ratchet finds a pair of hover boots and then magically Rivet also has hover boots? What? Give me a throwaway line, game. Give me something. See, I would have thought that when making a game with the conceit of two playable main characters, one of the first places you'd start would be figuring out what different abilities or attributes they could have to distinguish them, but nah, freaking nah! I suppose there's nothing inherently faulty with this model in a practicality sense, but I feel like I'm within my rights to ask, what's the point in having two main characters if you're just gonna treat them like one and the same? Why try to expand the universe of the game this way just to turn around and tell the same old story you've already told with no self-awareness whatsoever?
Wow. Another Lombax.
Should I say it? Do you want me to say it? Honestly, I'm kind of tired. I don't know if I really need to say it. I've said it a lot already. Actually, that kind of leads to one last thing I want to bring up about Rivet. In A Crack in Time, this.
I'm sorry, have we confirmed that Angela Cross is in fact a Lombax? I know that was the assumption, but she doesn't have a tail.
Female Lombaxes don't have tails, Kip.
And now we have Rivet. Huh. This, to me, was a flag that Rivet might be transgender. And if that's the case, it's actually pretty clever. If you're not a fan of the series, you may not even be aware of this. And even if you are, it's not like thrown in your face and the complete and entire basis for her character. Nah, it's just something about her. Having a trans female as one of your leads, taking up half the box art no less, like it's the most normal thing in the world, it's good stuff, y'all. Now, that was my thought before playing Rift Apart. After working my way through it, I don't actually think that's what Insomniac was going for. As far as I can tell, it's just a different dimension thing. Or is it? The Lombaxes originally used the Dimensionator to escape to their own little dimension to avoid extinction. If Lombaxes existed in Rivet's dimension and she's the only one left, a la Ratchet, did those Lombaxes also skedaddle-skedoodle? Did they go to the same dimension? Cause the way they talk in Rift Apart makes it sound like there's only one Lombax dimension.
After this, are you and Ratchet going to the Lombax dimension?
Is there only one? And is there only one set of Lombaxes? Or is the one dimension stuffed with potentially limitless multiple alternate dimensions worth of Lombaxes? Or are there possibly endless Lombax dimensions for every dimension from which Lombax is left? Nurse, it's happening again! All of this to say that Insomniac missed an opportunity here. You'd think they'd have learned from the whole Angela incident back in 2007 that sometimes it pays to actually keep track of your receipts and not flush them away like so much cheap wee-wee. And to be clear, whether or not Rivet is indeed trans has no real bearing on my opinion of Rift Apart as a whole. Just a detail I picked up on, thought was cool, then realized probably went unsupported, despite the fact that most of the work towards it had already been put in, just kind of ignored. You know what? None of my business. Not my game, do what you want. Honestly, the dimensional change I'm most worried about is how in the Ratchet dimension you talk to Mrs. Zircon of the Zircon family, but in the Rivet dimension she's Ms. Zircon, and Zircon Jr. still exists. No way this game is suggesting that a big dimensional change for the Zircon family is divorce. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. In the Rivet dimension, Mr. Zircon is a staunch pacifist and owner of a peaceful cantina, yet his wife peddles weapons for a living and his son is infatuated with violence. Though there's a fundamental split between their worldviews, both parents mutually love and support their child's interests and will continue to nurture them, starting to save for their future education, enabling his violence worship through an arena outside the cantina, despite understanding deep down they can't truly be together. But this unifies them. Never mind at some point how these robos stopped being literal commodities and became individual characters. Where's this story? First time I've ever cared about these friggin' robots, tell me their story. But back to what we're stuck with. As I hurriedly described, and as I'ma continue to do so we can keep this rolling, Shadow Dude helps Ratchet nab a ship so he can get off-world and start contributing again. Meanwhile, Rivet brings Clank to her hideout on shiny Sargasso to buff out his lies. There's a bit of a stink raised about how Rivet doesn't initially trust Clank, but it's so half-hearted, it's honestly funny. I don't even think it's a thing about him being a robot and therefore potentially a nefarious groupie. She just doesn't believe him about there being another Lombax running around.
Why are you so hesitant to trust me?
Look, robots aren't really my thing.
Or maybe that is part of it? Why is this so weird? Yeah, I know they're gonna be friends anyway, so best not dwell in it. And Rivet acting more pointedly spish and hardened would be super cliche. But there's just like nothing here, dude. You have emotions too? Wow! Are you, or are you not suspicious? And why not? Again, with the whole friends just existing thing. And again, with the Rivet just being Ratchet thing, since he's friends with Clank. Wouldn't want to complicate things by Rivet having a different rapport with Clank, heaven forfend. Oh, wobbling, forward momentum, let's go! From there, it's just a hop, skip, mini-boss, and a weirdly uncomfortable exchange away from re-establishing contact with Ratchet and the gang more or less getting together. Yay, new friends! For what I suppose counts as the game's second act, the goal of the gang is to build a new Dimensionator, because the last one did that. It's on Rivet and Clank to scrounge up some fuel, while Ratchet's job is to actually build the damn thing. It was around this time that a thought occurred to me, that something wasn't quite right with this game, despite a handful of superficial similarities to the classic Ratchet style. The first 2 levels each feature an optional or branching path. Ooh! For the second act, you can choose for yourself where to go, following either Rivet or Ratchet. Each Lombax has 2 planets to which to venture for building said Dimensionator, and it's up to you if you want to do all of Rivet's first, then Ratchet's, maybe flip-flop, whatever. A bit of extra agency to your progression, varied planets with NPCs to meet, egads. We even get a censored swear like the good old days. So what's the problem? Well, the problem in Rift Apart is the same exact problem suffered by the Future subseries, and that there's just no sense of life. Much like the Future games, for all big talk about saving universes, said universes seem to only consist of 7 or 8 recurring characters, all of whom don't so much interact with the leads as they do orbit around them. Planets aren't places in their own rights, but mere glittery backdrops for the next batch of cutscenes. There's no culture, no connective themes or shared character to bring them together. Ironically, for a game about space, there's no atmosphere. Sure, there are a lot of little NPCs scuttling around, but they don't do anything. There's no real interaction with them, nothing they do tells a story, they're just decorative. And then there are the NPCs deemed worthy of interacting with the protagonist, of which there's only like 1 per planet, all of whom have the same personality, and that's Quarky! You know, that kind of stock sci-fi comedy character that confuses talking too much with being funny.
You can call him Juicy, or Juicy, or JC. Oh, that is a swell nickname.
Guys, I have a confession to make. I just deceived you. That voice doesn't come from this character. But you believed me, didn't you? That's because all these Johnny Talks-a-lots are all interchangeable, and in the grand scheme, pointless. What are their jobs? What are their lives like? What do they do? Live to serve the protagonist, I guess, since they're the only ones that matter. Everything else is an unbroken blur of loud non-jokes, a wannabe Avengers soundtrack, and random LOL Frenchman pirates that do nothing but fill space. Random pirates are funnier, right, me hearty? It goes deeper than that, though, to the actual planets themselves. As opposed to previous Ratchet games, the planet counts of which hover around the high teens, each on the shorter side, Rift Apart consists of only 8 planets, 9 if we count the battle arena / story checkpoint planet, all of which will take about an hour to get through. Quantity was not sacrificed for quality, however. Most of the levels here are just as, if not more, linear than those of the Future games. Missions in Rift Apart generally feel like continuous set pieces, very pre-planned. Go to 1, to 2, hubba, dubba, hubba. Frequently pulling away control for a cutscene or making you stand somewhere waiting for the scene to properly set. Cutscenes were rewards or even checkpoints before, now they're just part of the grind. It almost feels like Ratchet and Clank adapted to the hold up to go forward model. Replaying through challenge mode, it really sank in how much of every level consists of 1 room, then cutscene, then 1 room, then another cutscene. Not to downplay things too much, you are in full control for all but like 1 sequence, but the gist I'm gisting at is that Rift Apart feels much more aggressive than any other game in the series in funneling the player down a very controlled experience, rather than letting them discover or progress by themselves, and consequently giving the player, very frequently, nothing grander to do than just keep walking until they're told to stop. There are secrets to find for the snoop-arounders, but let me be a big jerk and blow the lid off this whole operation. When you're playing through a level, if you see an obvious side path, take it. You will always find a secret. 85% completion minimum. Bam. There are a few cheeky spots, but by the final hours, the game gets straight up lazy. Multiple times you're passing through a room and literally the gold bolt is sitting right there. The game just like, psst, hey, come get this if you want. If I'm missing a gold bolt in an original Ratchet game, I'd have to check the map for unexplored areas, consider the tools at my disposal, really engage with the game and the planet, and each new discovery was a supremely satisfying get because of it. Back in my day, I collected every gold bolt in Rift Apart largely by accident, and I didn't feel a thing, because the game basically found them for me. If I'm missing something in Rift Apart, all I need to do is pull open the map. Where's the rift? There's the rift. Much like the reboot, Rift Apart is eager to stamp immersion-breaking optional tags on stuff. I really don't mind knowing which missions are the side missions. Really. It's more the little things that get me. Like how every pocket dimension has this optional tag. Like, yeah, they're all optional. Pocket dimensions give you armor, and you're never required to get armor. So like, do you really think we can't put 2 and 2 together? The game also keeps up the tradition of everyone talking just way too much, but I'm less mad at this game specifically and more at Insomniac because this has been a thing for their past several games that they just need to stop. Dialogue is a tool, and like a tool, if you go wedging it in things willy-nilly, it hurts. This game in particular does have a terrible habit of forcing voices onto things that really don't need them. Why the floating fungus needs to jape and jest is beyond me, it just gives me Mr. Zircon flashbacks. Most egregiously is the hacking robot, Glitch, who starts off cute, but swiftly becomes insufferable on account of never shutting up! And you'd think this goes without saying, but not every enemy we cross has to deliver a friggin' Petrarchan sonnet mid-fight. Everyone's shouting all the time, I can't even hear myself think! Take it all together, there's an air of artificiality about Rift Apart, as there was with the reboot and to a fair extent the future games. Everything feels hollow, no cultures, just open sets and aimless jokes with no punchlines in sight, constantly shouting at you to make sure you're still listening, incessantly pulling you along like a wooden duck on a string, obsessed with only your immediate attention, and pirates. Arr. Whenever a new Ratchet game hits a new generation of PlayStation hardware, journalists everywhere see who can be the fastest in the West to whip out the terribly insightful line, like playing a Pixar movie. Rift Apart feels like Insomniac intentionally leaning into that, hyper-focused as it is on high-gloss cinematic presentation, oftentimes at the expense of the player, or at least I felt expended. Ratchet's first proper planet, Zavali, is probably one that people are gonna hold up highly, but I found it pretty exhausting. After a quick jaunt through a besieged monk settlement, the main level has you navigating across an open desert to 3 temples to save monks trapped in each. This level reminds me a lot of Tyrannosis from Up Your Arsenal, a planet that also asks you to navigate a largely open-ended expanse to take down a series of set objectives. But Zavali's big difference is a map that's easily 5 times larger, if not more. And much like Tyrannosis, the big problem with this mission is how it turns Ratchet into a waypoint game, in which all you do is disinterestedly speed to a waypoint set on your map. Maybe not so much for the first half of the mission, since you can organically use the big light shows on top of the temples to find them, but after that, yeah, that's exactly what it is. While I'll welcome the chance to stretch my legs, I can't help but feel like we've lost the thread here. Exploration implies a degree of discovery, not just picking icons off a map like we're combing out lice. Aside from the usual gold bolts, pocket dimensions, and the like, all there is to find on Zavali are these audio log things, but they don't play over gameplay, so you gotta dig through a menu and just sit there to listen to them. My favorite activity, sitting and listening.
And there were these creatures. One of them even looked like a Lombax, but he had smaller ears, a mask, and a cane, and I think he was pulling some kind of heist?
At least you get some hover boots to make the commute more enjoyable. I actually kind of like Rift Apart's hover boots. You hold the button to go, but you can mash L2 to kick until you get a massive boostio. Gives them a bit more interactivity and control over how fast you want to go. I like it. Although it does make me wonder why the hell the game has a sprint function on L3 when, literally, is this not a better sprint function? Was there a huge worry people would promptly drop the game if they had to go just 2 hours without getting a go fast button? You know, considering how stupid long some of the nefarious city streets can be, maybe it's for the best. Zavali does come with a somewhat significant plot development, though. This is Kit. I know what you're thinking, by how you could probably tell by the way she rides on your back and obviously resembles a certain other prominent character, and yes, that's pretty much the case, but we'll get to that. Kit is probably the most dynamic character of Rift Apart's roster, for it's through her the game most prominently pushes the theme of confidence. Much like her primetime counterpart, she comes with some sad backstory about how she's a defective warbot whose primary malfunctions include a heart and a soul. Now she's worried that if she goes big mode, her kill programming will take over and she'll hurt someone she actually likes. Thus, she'd rather be alone. It's Ratchet who extends a friendly hand and puts her on a path to stop living in so much fear of herself. Couple things let the air out a bit. First and foremost, how Kit has to choose to go big mode instead of it being something that can randomly take her over. Might just be more of an identity thing eating away at her, granted, but the practical side of me can't help but point out that it seems like she's got a firmer handle on things than she's letting on. The game also goes on to parrot Kit's exact same characterization with every other main character, which simultaneously dilutes the impact a bit and renders it a tad overwrought. Everyone has a hobby of loudly voicing their insecurities to themselves or others. Ratchet's worried that he hasn't proven himself worthy of the Lombaxes yet. Clank feels guilty he inadvertently caused this whole mess and now he doesn't know if he can clean it up. And Rivet's somewhere in the middle, not quite doomsaying herself, but not quite oozing confidence in her abilities. Humble, I guess, in a word, but still in the same vein as everyone else. I kinda wish she was more forward, though, to help her stand out, because as you can imagine, all the characters smear into the same space. What with having basically the same arc to go through, said arc being for a pretty standard message. And I think Kit's the only one that really benefits to any positive degree on account of actually having work put in and it being solved by character interaction, whereas everyone else's quibbles dry up on their own pretty easily. But as I've hinted at, and as we'll see later, Kit still could have used a little bit more caboodle. You know, I'm something of a writer myself. Perhaps the most interesting planets in the game are Blizar Prime and Cordelian, for they got a bit of a gimmick to them. Scattered around the levels are these crystals. When you whack them, you get transported into another dimension's version of the current planet, with the missions having you switch back and forth between dimensions to ultimately reach your goal. They remind me quite a bit of the Tomley Outpost and Gimlick Valley missions from A Crack in Time, which, if you recall, had the player hopping between the past and the present, oftentimes impacting the former to change up the latter, typically by planting some big-ass vines. And like the Tomley Outpost and Gimlick Valley levels, I like the idea here, but the mechanics are underserved. Given how the points at which you change dimensions are basically contextual, practically speaking, there's not much differentiating these levels from your standard linear fare. Tomley Outpost and Gimlick Valley weren't much better with the interplay between past and present, but at least being in the same level, you could see consequences of your actions actually changing the level. It's kinda cool, you know? Once a war-torn valley resulting in total ruin, because of your intervention, now it's a prosperous glen. In Rift Apart, being in one dimension doesn't meaningfully impact the other, so it might as well be one long level with alternating sets of wallpaper. Cool wallpaper, but it would have been swell to see these mechanics played up a bit into something more, you know, impactful to core gameplay. Or even if they threw in a third dimension for each. Come on, let's get crazy with it! Of the two planets, I guess I prefer Blizar Prime. Cordelian's got some cool moments, like having to organically use a rift to make distance from an unkillable monster to buy enough time to use a bolt crank. And said unkillable monster does give the planet more variety, but it's really easy to clown the monster, because you can move 30 times its speed. Did we forget the last mission gave us hoverboots? Feels like we forgot. Outside of that, the environments are a mixed bag. The humor certainly belongs 20,000 Leagues Under, if you catch my fish, and it's easily among the most linear set PC levels in the game. Hope you like long hallways. The defining moment of the planet, or even the game as a whole, come to think of it, comes when you walk along the sea floor for a bit, a visually vibing but practically useless 60-second interlude in which all you do is walk along a specifically laid out path with one obvious gold bolt on the side. Not even swimming, walking. Looks like this level is all washed up. Ha ha ha! Up top! Anyone? Our dog? Blizar Prime's more visually interesting, but in addition to all the linearity groans, it's a prime example of a planet oriented around a subplot which does nothing but distract from the main plot. Cordelian too, but this one especially. We arrive on the scene only to find it's been completely blown to bits. Alright, thought I, badass. Nefarious destroyed the planet before we can get to it, that's hardcore. But no, turns out the planet was destroyed through a completely unrelated accident. I guess the intrigue we're going for is figuring out what the accident was and trying to prevent it for this intact Blizar Prime, but the problem there is that I didn't even realize at first it was meant to be an intrigue. Nothing seems wrong with the intact Blizar Prime, and nothing about the mystery unravels out of anything we do, save for at the very end when we turn on the drill, which is apparently what causes the destruction, but doesn't really seem like it's going to, but the music's getting loud so you know it's getting dramatic up in here. Our objective is to get a rock, and by golly, the game's gonna find a way to stretch that task into an hour of gameplay. Now, you might get to the end of Blizar Prime and think, the one NPC was pretty straight-laced compared to the others. Well, that's because you missed the side mission, where we got Quirk coming out of our noses. Say hello to Chef Trulio. She's on a quest for inspiration so she might craft a culinary magnum opus the likes of which the galaxy has yet to witness, and with your help, such ambrosia will be given form. It's just a standard defend the point mission, though the entire time you get to hear Chef Trulio shout about all the honey-based honey dishes that were made of honey that we're gonna eat after you leave. Then it ends, and then you get part of the schematics for building the rhino weapon. Because it's part of a recipe? Is that why? See, I would have gone with the bolt magnetizer to fit the honey theme. I go out of my way, I do you this favor, and you give me something I could have picked up off the ground on any other planet. Can I just get off this planet, please? I take it back, let me go back! Tauren 4 is probably the worst planet of the bunch, and the entire game, and maybe the whole series, screw it. So, on Blizar Prime, Rivet and Clank were trying to mine some crystal to power up the Dimensionator, and they found one, but then it broke. Oh. I'll be real, I'm not entirely clear on what makes this crystal completely unusable in this state, but apparently it's so bad we have to go to an entirely different planet, which was in an entirely different galaxy in the future games, but another dimension, and get this fixer character to patch it up. Literally, it broke is the only reason we go to Torren 4, and that's all the plot is for like a whole hour. Wonderful writing. Hey, you know what would have blown my socks completely off? If the laser drill had broken Clank instead. Come on, Rivet feels super guilty, goes out of her way to fix him, tries to hide it from Ratchet, maybe get some conflict going later. Tell me that wouldn't have rocked your world. Sure, it wouldn't make Rivet all that endearing in the moment, but boy would my attention have been grabbed. Grabbed hard. Torren 4 is basically an hour of go to the next platform, shoot the bad guys, repeat. Pirates show up, I don't really know why. You know, apparently pirates are part of the Resistance, but we're fighting them an awful lot. I guess they're resisting Nefarious, but not as part of the capital R Resistance. Who is in the Resistance? And how come none of the places we go to anymore are actually oppressed in any way by Emperor Nefarious? Like he's discovering them for the first time as us. I was surprised we don't even get any S-bombs dropped the whole game. Considering Nefarious is in charge and his empire consists solely of robots, you'd think a fuzzy organic life form poking around would rouse some suspicion or be worth calling out, but no one cares. The only thing drier than these arid plains is this game's world building. For some reason, the Fixer is a giant robot, I guess as a reference to the fake giant robot from A Crack in Time's Torren 4. No joke, I audibly sighed when the first thing this guy did upon powering up was launch into a monologue. Like, of course. Why wouldn't he talk? Turns out he's a nihilist though, so instead of helpy fix, he starts to smashy break, prompting a grind rail set piece. Half this planet has been grind rail set pieces. Blizzard Prime 2! Is there a tax credit for having so many? And then this one abruptly stops when Clank goes, "It's okay, baby." And the Fixer's like, yeah, you're right. And then just fixes the thing, and then the level's over. I love how he has this little beam. Not part of his design or anything, it's just this plot beam that shoots out of his face. Did I say love? I mean, my stomach hurts. What an absolute fiesta. After those 4 planets, the fuel obtained and the new Dimensionator 3D printed, the gang agrees to meet in person at Mr. Zircon's cantina. Places, people, places! We're about to witness the only remaining Lombaxes of the series coming face to face at long last.
Hey.
Hey! Yes, hi.
I've seen some people talking crap on this scene. Honestly, I thought it was kinda cute. I mean, what did you expect? How would you have reacted? Of course it'd be awkward. It's like, you're real. Okay. The myth's fallen away, of course the reality's gonna be awkward and underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, the scene's not great, but I don't think it was ever gonna be, is my point. So I won't get in too much of a strop over it. So they go to do the important thing, but oh, there's a doctor in the house! Finally getting off his ass and doing something. Rivet volunteers to fight him, and fight she shall. If you've played any Ratchet & Clank game with Dr. Nefarious in it before, get ready to cross another square off your bingo card. His boss fight here plays very familiarly to his previous. Swarms of missiles, laser beams, bomb lobbing. A lunging strike? Daring today, aren't we? The fight taking you through multiple rifts and locations would be cool, had a mini-boss from the first hour not cribbed with the same set dressing, or if the portals actually factored into gameplay, but barring the grossly unnecessary Grunthor aside, it's a fine enough fight, I guess. Be a lot cooler if it had Lawrence in it, but whatever, it's fine. So Rivet wins, but keep that champagne corked, because it looks like Big Daddy's finally home.
Wow! What a battle!
Emperor Nefarious is one of the most forgettable villains in the entire Ratchet & Clank series. He's just so boring. A cookie-cutter, smarmy conqueror type with nothing to say that 1,000 villains before him have. In an English accent, natch, and none of the on-screen presence oozed by his counterpart. Speaking of which, I feel like we struck out twice in the villain department. Even at his laziest, Dr. Nefarious is always fun to watch, but in Rift Apart he's barely on screen once we get to the new dimension, and then the Emperor shows up and the Doctor might as well not even be here anymore. There's no real interplay or conflict between the Nefarii. There are no dueling egos or playful banter emphasizing their differences. The Doctor barely even talks, and when he does, it's like everyone just ignores him. Emperor announces his intentions to invade the Ratchet dimension, and Doctor's like, "Eh?" And that's it. He's not threatening, he's pathetic. But what's worst of all is that despite all of that, he's still a monumentally more engaging watch than this poser, who might as well not even have the name Nefarious for all it matters. We get another branch here, with Rivet and Kit going back to Sargasso to fight off a Nefario Bro invasion, and Ratchet and Robot go to the pirate planet Ardolis to find some Captain Quantum chap who will in some way help. Not much to say about the Sargasso retread, because that's all it is. This is just the map again. For the last bit, you do get to fly a Lair-esque mount. Who remembers that? But I've played through this game twice at this point, and I'm still not entirely sure if it's possible to take damage during this bit. Coupled with the almost infinite range for contextually throwing these bombs, you got a sequence that feels like it plays itself. Should I consider this the game's alternative to ship piloting? I don't, it just occurred to me that there's no ship piloting in this game. No swimming, no ship combat, we're really trimming down, aren't we? At this rate, the next Ratchet game won't even let you play as Clank. Actually, that's kind of the case in this game, foreshadowing, teehee. As for Ardolis, I don't mind it so much. It's quite linear with no real plot going on. Pirates are funny random, yeah, but it's got some cute secrets around the bazaar, and I like how the game subverts the classic path of death by putting you on a pirate theme park attraction instead, which just ends with a bunch of pirates trying to kill you anyway. There's stealing people's money and property through piracy, and then there's doing it through amusement park extortion, since the last attraction is just meant to kill you anyway. All that's missing is actually having to pay an entry fee, but what's there is still pretty funny. Plus, the boys making the nice music. Although I don't get the point of Captain Quantum, like, at all, besides the obvious that we just wanted to have an alternate Quark. He doesn't do anything. He's got access to some bug in the Emperor's chambers, but it's so lazily described, I have no clue why he's the one who has it. Or why is he like a pirate? Like, what? I guess we were supposed to save him, but he just gets captured anyway, so hour of my life spent about as well as it'll ever be. After completing both the levels, we have another retread, this time through Savali. It's nighttime now, though, and all the enemies are spooky skeletons, so yep, whole new level. The Emperor is looking for some new dimensional MacGuffin so he can take over more dimensions, cause it's not about having enough, it's about having it all. During this mission, we ping-pong a bit between the main characters, starting as Ratchet, live from the planet's surface, then as Rivet for a series of shootouts on a nefarious ship, before hopping back to Ratchet, zooming underground through some goopy catacombs. All this mission does is hold up the characters side by side and exacerbate the missed opportunity of not giving them unique gameplay hooks. I'm imagining some joint test of skills as you demonstrate your mastery of one gameplay style, then you quickly have to swap over to the other. Then I open my eyes and it's the same level asking you to do the same things, then do them somewhere else. And then another boss we fought 50 times, but this one has no skin. Yeah, I'm playing this moment again. I know a lot of people really like it, but I'm gonna have to be that guy here and point out that Clank's not facing the right way, he didn't actually see it. I know, fun police, but these games have made jokes about Ratchet having to turn around to show Clank stuff in the past. Can't just turn it around like, nah, you can see that one. And while I'm at it, back on Blizzard Prime, we're in an alternate dimension, but the Ms. Zircon hanging out there acts and talks like the one from the Rivet dimension. Watch it, Insomniac, one of these days someone of actual importance is gonna see these, and they're gonna tell Mother Sony on you. Once the boners are dealt with, the duo find the MacGuffin, but it's trapped in some dimensional anomaly thing. Luckily, Clank's well versed in dealing with such trifles at this point, and so begins the final Clank segment of the game. There have been a few of these so far. There's one in which you play as Kit, but it's the same thing, so... But I haven't mentioned them because I've been kind of stalling, so I don't have to talk about them, but now I'm talking about them and the pressure's on and... I don't think I like these Clank segments. How they work is that there's a line of imaginary Clanks marching one by one, and you, as the real Clank, need to clear their path so they can run headlong into a door at the end of the level. Apparently, it's like a metaphor or something for figuring out this interdimensional nonsense, but in practice, it's kind of like a mix of the time pad puzzles from A Crack in Time and the Gadgetbot escorting from the PS2 games. And I find the end result underwhelming. Honestly, the trickiest part is collecting all the orbs you need to use to mess with the environment and/or you and yourselves. Since your supply is limited, as are the spots to actually use the orbs, and the path you need to escort moves in a single line ever forward, actually getting the can-can line to the door feels like the wrap-up portion instead of the actual meat of the puzzles. Feels like you can just keep slamming the round peg around the board until you find its slot instead of looking for the hole that isn't square. Now, I can get behind faster, easier puzzles than, say, A Crack in Time and that's time pad flappery. As clever as those are, they do pull back hard on the reins of the pacing, especially on your first playthrough when you have to stand around and think and whatnot. And either way, the gasp of variety Clank offers from the typical combat routine is nice. Mechanics just don't quite click so well to me, as opposed to past Clank segments which were oriented around very firm central mechanics. These just feel a bit sloppy.
Ooh, friend of my father. I see.
Your father?
I believe you know him as the plumber.
You ever want to just punch a video game? Yeah, me neither. Insomniac has also been weirdly proud of the fact that you can skip these segments without any penalty. It would have been unthinkable to give the option to skip puzzles 3 to 5 years ago, which is a fat, stinky lie, but this goes back even further than the 2016 reboot's Trespasser, all the way back to 2009. You could actually skip the Clank time pad puzzles in a crack in time if you got stumped. You'd get penalized too. You wouldn't get a shower of bolts come the end or any precious skill point progress. I'm actually really concerned at this point. How does Insomniac keep forgetting things they did? You could even ask the game for hints back then, before slamming the get out button. Now it's bored now, skip! Maybe I'm in the dark on something here, but I really don't see this easy skip option as anything to trump it. You put these puzzles in the game, Insomniac. If there was some concern over difficulty or even potentially accessibility, or if you just thought that people wouldn't want to do the puzzles, maybe don't put them in the game? Or change them, maybe, so people actually want to play them? These are the least mechanically intensive segments of your game. Providing a free skip option isn't modernizing their difficulty, unless you're poking fun at the low attention span society in which we currently— Sweet boy Artie, is that a pigeon out there? I don't even see the point of playing these Clank bits at all, honestly. There's no reward for actually doing them, not even satisfaction, so why bother? And I realize I'm both possessing cake and consuming it here, but if the difference between doing something in your game and not doing it nets precisely the same outcome, something has gone wrong on the design side. Again, maybe I'm missing something, but for a game with a running theme of confidence, sure doesn't come off as a very confident move. So Clank gets the thing, except I'm kidding. It's the Nefario bros that get the thing. In an attempt to save the others, Kit goes big mode, but, doesn't matter, everyone goes in the hole. Except Rivet, cause I guess they didn't notice her. At the end of the Sargasso retread, Rivet and Kit got thrown into the exposition dimension so Rivet could tell Kit how she lost her arm when a 2-ton warbot sneakily got the drop on her. Who could it be? Oh, right. So Kit's embiggening here partly serves as her mea culpa. Though feelings remain hurt, Rivet still gears up to go save her pals, and also Kit. Rivet heads to Zordoom Prison over on planet Viceron. You might recall this prison planet from Tools of Destruction, specifically from a mission in which Ratchet and Clank endeavored to rescue Talwyn and her robot dads. Not sure if there's any commentary to glean from the rescuer's gender being flipped this time around. The only topic I'm equipped to discuss is bemoaning yet another linear level with yet the same handful of enemies to shoot. Seriously, Up Your Arsenal would laugh at this game's enemy variety, and that is a really bad position to be in Rift Apart. While Rivet finds everyone right away, about 40 minutes or so of the mission is just going, oh, Ratchet and Kit are over there, another over here, you gotta be quicker than that, before finally it takes and they're broken out. It's a 3-to-1 vote to go after the Emperor, with Kit being the odd bot out, due to worries about Big Mode and sorrow for the arm she cost Rivet. Rivet ain't having it, leaving Kit behind to mope. Rivet leaving Kit stranded on a prison planet pity party is probably the closest to callous these characters have gotten thus far, but it and the subsequent weak argument between Lombax 1 and 2 gets so hurriedly cleaned up, it's hard to feel the drama when it lasts for all of 10 seconds, doesn't let it soak. Ah, man. Oh, hey, trophy! Be a bad friend! With the MacGuffin villainously secured and ante sufficiently upped, the Emperor plans to kick off his multiverse takeover with a jaunt over to the proper Ratchet dimension. Yes, literally like Doofenshmirtz in the Phineas and Ferb movie, even with the same sudden off-orange atmosphere engulfing Megapolis as soon as the bad guy shows up. Sure, you can copy my homework, just don't make it obvious, lol. A linear procession of enemies gives way to the final boss fight against the Emperor. It starts off pretty weird, with the Emperor piloting a giant mech and sticking his various body parts through rift portals to fight us in the foreground, because I guess he's too lazy to just walk on over. That then segues into a proper scrap with the man himself. Hi, Dr. Scott here to diagnose a case of this guy's literally untouchable in the cutscenes but conveniently doesn't have that power anymore in the boss fight. Itis. You'd think if any boss was gonna use the dramatically tumbling through portal shtick, it would be this one, with the dimensions collapsing around us and all. The whole dimensions collapsing thing is really more of a conversation piece for Rift Apart. Whenever there's a lull, we can just bring it up again. Oh, hey, there go the dimensions collapsing again. Not really that big a deal, even at the end of the game. But of course, before we even get to that, we still have an all is lost moment to check off our list, which we get with Rivet hopelessly surrounded by infinite stranger dangers and everything is all terrible for all about 4 seconds until Kit crashes the soiree. Done moping and ready to kick some background enemies in the background, because she's just in the background for the fight. You know, Clank got in a few licks of his own against Drek. This doesn't really feel like a team effort. Okay, I am dangerously close to a pettiness overdose here, so let's just wrap this up. Rivet wins. Emperor falls in an octopus's hole and dies. Because of the dimension puzzles, Clank can see the code, and so he stops the dimensions from crapping themselves. And then the day is saved. And then the game ends. And then we watch some cutesy credits. Aw, look at that, they having a picnic. Alright, what's going on in this one? I guess Lawrence is in this game. Wait, what's he got?
There is another.
In the end, it was all worth it. I had a sinking feeling the moment Kit showed up that all the story of Rift Apart was going to amount to would be her and Rivet teaming up, and lo and behold, which itself wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that Rivet and Kit joining up doesn't feel central to the story. In a game about selfishness, it was important for Ratchet and Clank to become bros because Ratchet himself had to learn to look past his own selfishness. Thematically, but also in a literal sense, because Clank couldn't save the day alone because he's small. I feel like Rift Apart lacks a similar make-or-break tension, since we already have not one, but two incredibly capable hero types all locked and loaded and ready to get splodin'. Kit joining in's more of a bonus than anything. But even without that, Kit teaming up with Rivet's more for its own sake, as well as most overtly pushing the be confident message, but that ends up feeling pretty secondary against the baseline save the day rather than weaving into it. Again, just more of a bonus. But even beyond thinking things thematically, look, I'll be plain about this. I don't feel like Rivet and Kit actually become friends. They don't even interact until the top of the third act, give or take, which gives them like 5 scenes to both start and sort out their drama, and it feels so token. There's no mutual growth. No growth period for Rivet. There's nothing personal. Honestly, there's not even much of a reason they team up. It very much feels like they only team up because of course they would. They're the new Ratchet and Clank, and Ratchet and Clank team up, you need more of a reason than that. I'd even go so far as to say their team up feels forced. In fact, a few cues throughout the game led me to expect that, maybe at the end, Rivet and Kit would actually go their separate ways, in a statement that you shouldn't let your fate be designed by preconceived notions. Believe in yourself and forge your own path. That's not the case, though. Be more confident as a message is fine and all, especially in a game pointedly directed at a younger crowd, but it's a topic Rift Apart explores with all the depth and subtlety of an inch-thick brick. Like I said before, it's a concept the game thinly spreads across its entire main cast, even some on the side, and it gives each of them the exact same weak resolution. Just be more confident. Save for Kit, there's nothing the characters have to personally overcome. They're fine as is. They just have to keep doing what they're doing, but with a better attitude. No one needs to grow, learn, or look inward, and it's overdone to the point at which it feels like that's the only understanding the game trusts you to get. Nothing deeper. Maybe not even that. The confidence thing comes off as more doting than anything, and it doesn't manifest in any actual themes or in any thoughtful way that could challenge or impinge upon your understanding of the story or its characters, and the unflappable goodness wrapped around each like so much glittery, unblemished paper. Wordy, wordy, word. Themes, plot, nice and good for the nerd. When the chips are down, it all falls on the characters. And the characters here are simply too vanilla. Insomniac really has no idea how to characterize Ratchet these days beyond the whole last of his kind thing, and that well's been dry since they built it 14 years ago. I'll tell you how to start. Make him interesting to watch. He's become such a basic bitch goody two-shoes, never a selfish moment, so doting, no grit, no edge, no it factor. All of his original impetuous temperamental qualities haven't been sanded down, they're straight up gone with no replacement. All he is now is a nice guy doing nice things, and he sucks. Watch out everyone, Scott's getting angry about the hero in a hero game acting heroic! Look, I'm not saying I want Ratchet from Ratchet 1 back, or whatever. Not even I want that. What I don't want is a cocksure badass with a heart of gold to now be some insecure nerd and pretend it's development. I want a character whose personality can't be summed up in 4 letters. I want a character who isn't some empty plastic shell. And Rivet's no better. They both have the same personality. Bland as the day is long. In pursuit of making these characters flawlessly likable, they just aren't engaging. What Rift Apart fails to grasp for all its pretensions to storytelling by any sort of emotion is that you need to have characters that do more than merely be polite to each other. You need to tickle under the surface. You actually have to put in the work to move characters and us through a spectrum of emotions, instead of just telling us you're thinking about doing it. Is the story bad? No, it's competent. It doesn't overstay its welcome, but it's also predictable and tame in that corporate made-for-kids way. What it is a C-tier Into the Spider-Verse. Same alternate universe shtick, same themes of be confident, be yourself, but none of the heart, emotions, character growth, sass, self-awareness, and questionable hygiene. It's not a question with Rift Apart. It's clean. Too clean. As in afraid to get messy. I can't seem to shake out of my head that one special word. polite. You could call Ratchet & Clank a lot of things back in the day, but polite was not one of them. Clank was the only one who could fit that term, innocent sweet boy he was. And even then, he still broke out the odd feather ruffler.
Jealous?
No one gave a space rat's ass in the classic Ratchet games, and it was awesome. Be it the most obscure one-off encounter, or everything out of the lead character's flappy mouth. Everyone was looking out for themselves, and manners cost $50 extra. Don't even look at the games, look at the boxes, look at the titles! Going Commando, up your butt! Even the Future games gave us Quest for Booty. Rift Apart? What's that even supposed to be? Ripped a fart? That's not even an innuendo, that's just a fart joke, that's ground floor stuff! Compared to other Ratchet games, Rift Apart comes across as naive. What you see is what you get, and what you get is the same story we've done before, but worse, with such an opportunity to be more. I feel like this, more than any other Ratchet game other than maybe Crack in Time, had such prime potential to reflect on the series' beginnings. In a game whose central thrust is meant to be another Ratchet & Clank coming together, the circumstance is so perfectly teed up to remind us how meaningful Ratchet & Clank originally becoming bros was, and how far they've come since. Or just reference it. Just have Ratchet think back on what he said to Clank and then apologize. But then again, Insomniac's made that clear that's not the story they want to remember. To acknowledge that original story is to acknowledge these characters once had flaws, and if a character has flaws, there's a chance someone may not like them, and that's not a chance that Insomniac's willing to take anymore. Rift Apart is nothing more than a slice of silly sci-fi, and where have I heard that before? Of course, there I go again, whittering on about the plot and deeper narrative ramifications of an Ickle Baby Jump game. What Ratchet's been coasting on at this point is gameplay. So what of gameplay? Gameplay in Rift Apart upholds the series' decades-long tradition in being a bit of platforming mixed with shooting and invariably leaning towards the latter, but that's not a problem. The Ratchet games being more into shooting stuff has never itself been a problem. The real problem would arise when the games would gear themselves more towards combat without properly orienting the rest of the gameplay around such, making you rely on manual strafing and clunky jump momentum like the days in which combat wasn't the focus. Thankfully, more recent games have amended this with a more streamlined lock-strafe-light scheme that makes both combat and platforming a breeze, and Rift Apart thankfully follows in this tradition. Controls smooth as butter down a dolphin's back are present and accounted for, but joining them are a handful of extra party favors. There are these rifts around the environment that allow you to rapidly reposition your fuzzy butt either further from the danger or deeper into it if that's what you're into. There's also a new dash move bound to the circle button, marking the first ever instance in the series of an actual evasive maneuver. When all put together, combat has a delightful and undeniable frisson, fast, snappy, and pretty damn aggressive enemies on the higher difficulties. Demanding, but not so demanding, the sweet spot the series has become so adept at striking. I made a cheeky pass at Doom Eternal way back when talking about Deadlocked, but Rift Apart nudges things in a direction that makes that comparison a lot more accurate, in a good way. Now, a nudge is a nudge, that's all it is. Don't get me wrong, the combat's still fun, but have the new additions evolved the core loop? Honestly, the rifts and dash add more spice to the platforming than the combat. There's a general fluidity of movement, notably more so than other Ratchet games. As you chain jumps into wall runs, into dashes, into grapples, that feels great, makes the mere act of locomotion a constant treat, and compels me to actively seek out platforming opportunities to flex the system in new ways. Meanwhile, in the combat, I feel like all the dashing does in the grand scheme is switch the button I mash to avoid bullets from X to circle. All this new mobility almost doesn't feel like it matters when the old trick still works just as well. And as neat as the rips can be, the fact they're basically contextual means they don't play into a lot of battles. And even when they do show up, they don't mitigate the biggest issues with the combat. Issues that have been plaguing this series for years. It still feels like there's no real strategy to craft in combat beyond throw out all the weapons that automatically fire themselves and or immobilize the enemy, then mash fire on whatever manual weapon you're leveling up at the moment, all while jumping and dodging like a jackrabbit on a sugar rush. And yeah, Ratchet combat's never been deep, per se, even at its best. And the immediate Twitch shooter experience is still fun, but it's as surface level as it gets and doesn't try to meaningfully deepen over the course of the game. It doesn't matter if the enemy's rank and file or top of the chain, every gun is good against every enemy, in every situation. And with low enemy variety, combat encounters blur together and get repetitive. The amount of weapons available does prevent things from getting totally stale. There's always something new to try out, but I'd say there are almost too many weapons, as many frequently overlap and overshadow each other. I don't know why we went back to the Buzzblades when we literally have another version of it with the Lightning Rod, or why we have the Agents of Doom again when we have the Flying Fungus fulfilling the same AI support role, and then enter stage left the Bombardier, which is basically the same as the Fungus except it doesn't speak. I feel like they had 5 different people coming up with weapons for this game, and none of them talked to each other at all during development. And we're still on this through-use upgrade system. Are we just scared? Or are we worried that every Ratchet fan might pump their PS5 through a closed window if they don't have their precious through-use system? Insomniac, this is holding the series back. This has consistently been one of the weakest aspects of these games. Okay, there are no menus to mess with. It sticks with the core gameplay and doesn't make you deviate too much from it. But it just feels plain bad. Artificial. It's a progression system that feels like it punishes you for using the weapons you like. And you've improved it before. You've literally done this system better in the past, but you always keep coming back to its most mediocre form. Please stop, you're tearing me apart. How about tying upgrades into collectibles, like the soul gems in Skylanders, or the weapon mods in Newer Doom? Or like the Constructo mods in A Crack in Time. Find a goober on a ledge, the sprinkler thing gets lawn ninjas, that sort of thing. Or just go all out and make every weapon super customizable. You gave the same concept to armor this time around, and it's great. One of the best features. Or hybridize, couple upgrades through leveling, couple through collectibles, blend combat and exploration, something! I'm literally rattling all of this off the top of my head. I am sure you could come up with something more interesting if you just gave a moment of time to think of something other than this archaic artificial numbers game. Or at least tell me what you're upgrading. Straight up, I had no idea that the Headhunter at level 5 could load up multiple shots at once because the game didn't tell me. Of course, that's the exception rather than the rule, since most level 5 upgrades are simply straight damage buffs and a fresh portmanteau. On the topic of weapons though, I do kinda like the adaptive trigger gimmick, courtesy of the DualSense controller. Most weapons have a sort of half-pull function, by which different firing modes and functions can activate depending on how far down the trigger is pressed. Example, the Enforcer Shotgun, which can fire one barrel if you press the trigger halfway, and both in rapid succession if you hold it, and the third one too if you go to max level. Or indeed, the Headhunter, which on one trigger can let you choose between charging up multiple shots and firing, and on the other slowing time if you aim down all the way instead of halfway. I'm a fan of the concept, but the main thing dragging it down is how it barely factors into so many of the weapons. Some guns don't have a gimmick, and most half-pull gimmicks are just aiming the damn thing. And we already have a perfectly good L2 button for that. And I did have the odd issue with the triggers randomly misbehaving and doing the wrong input. Still, cute idea. I hope to see more stuff like it going forward. I'm also a fan of how melee in this game is actually worth a damn. A surprising amount of damn, actually, to the point at which the wrench be mightier than half the guns. I'm not complaining. In the older games, the wrench was only really useful against the ankle biters, so having it as a legit option against actual enemies and even bosses is a lovely buff to quality of life, if nothing else. So like, yeah, there are good things going on here. Don't misunderstand me. Rift Apart is fun. At the end of the day, this is more of what's become the Ratchet & Clank formula. Little more, nothing less. And ain't that just a wrench to the head? 2004, Up Your Arsenal came out, and since then, how far have we come, exactly? What have we added to this formula? Hover boots? A new menu to look at? A dodge button? No matter how eloquently it does so, Rift Apart doesn't do anything more than parrot the old motions yet again. Sure, if it ain't broke, keep your wrench out of it, yada yada yada, but that's the thing, it is broke! There are so many ways this formula could be improved. These complaints about gameplay I've brought up here, I have brought them up when talking about every generation of Ratchet. All these years, and Insomniac has barely budged an inch. I wouldn't even agree that, well, maybe Rift Apart is at least the best version of the formula so far. In controls and maneuverability, sure, but every other way? Not really, no. Longer, more linear levels means lower variety in environments, but also in gameplay, since every level has virtually the same identity, feeling like the same string of enemy encounters shuffled in different orders. If I got a punch on my rewards card every time I fought this single mini-boss, I couldn't hold it anymore, because the card would be gone, and the only reward I could redeem for would be 2 of the mini-boss! Such sparse enemy variety and samey encounter design, it feels like there's so much less to see and do in Rift Apart. In some respects, I'd even say we've gone backwards, considering how the series began as a hybrid of game styles, platforming and combat. Now it's basically combat, with platforming way on the side. And combat doesn't even engage the way it once did when all the weapons work the same way, pointing at the thing and brrrr. There's no strategy, no synergies to test and experiment. It's the bottom line, with nothing to break it up other than the Clank bits. You thought Up Your Arsenal's hacking minigame was all shooting. Here comes Rift Apart's hacking gadget, which is the Landstalker from Deadlocked. Literally, it's the Landstalker from Deadlocked. Only this time with the wall climbing ability I said it should have, further proving I don't know what I'm talking about because it doesn't make it more fun. Oh well. And this is when the game actually lets you play. So many cutscenes and set pieces, Rift Apart's pace of game flow feels so much more stop-start than anything before, which makes it hard to maintain a good groove, and leads to some of the least memorable levels in the entire series when they practically play themselves. You got these big-ass, gorgeous-ass levels! All you're gonna do for most of them is just run right through. There are so many ways the scope of the Ratchet series could expand that Insomniac themselves have set up, they just never follow through. Why not build on a crack in time space exploration, or constructo-mod systems, or the level alternations into a game-wide mechanic? There's potential in all of these things to evolve the formula, or at least make something unique. The gimmicks weren't great before, but that doesn't mean you just drop them. Tweak them, integrate them differently, get creative. At its worst, Rift Apart feels inorganic and mindless. At its best, it's just more of the same game we've been playing for over a decade, almost 2. But yeah, no, could have only made this on PS5, gotta charge $70 for it, I get it. Which is $30 more than the reboot went for at launch, please note. A game that's maybe only an inch or two slimmer than Rift Apart. Sure hope the extra dosh is going towards a better exterminator, cause like, bugs dude, lots of bugs. I haven't seen a Ratchet game this technically out of whack since Tools of Destruction's hilariously shambled cutscenes.
Now you two can have the calves of a champion!
Did you call us here for a reason, or are you just trying to get us killed?
Enemies straight up disappeared or wound up in weird spots. Set pieces broke and made me fall through the world. One session I played, all of the music was gone for some reason, although I will admit that added a boost of unintentional comedy. Less funny were the occasional soft locks, and then a hard crash in which the controller went unresponsive beforehand before requiring me to boot back up in safe mode. Literally, the only other PS5 game in which this exact situation has ever happened to me before was Insomniac's own Spider-Man Miles Morales. Insomniac, I don't know what your deal is, but can you, like, sort it? Thanks? At least good old challenge mode gives replay value, bolt multiplier, omega weapons, even what looks like an XP bonus, which is actually super nice. See, this is the setting in which skipping puzzles makes some sense, but as I said before, the levels themselves are a little too long in set PC to hold up on a second go-through. When I went back to clean up collectibles and reshoot footage, it struck me how dead everything felt once the metaphorical camera crews were gone. Not only that, but Rift Apart also sets a new series record of having the worst rhino. I never really brought this up before, did I? In the Ratchet & Clank games, there's always some super weapon you can acquire, typically on a repeat run. A weapon so powerful, most games outright classify it as illegal.
R-Y-N-O. Rip ya a new one.
Typically, it simply fires approximately 1 missile per oxygen molecule in the room, but in Rift Apart, they give the Rhino 8 a gimmick, in that it opens up a rift and then drops something that makes a big boom. And damn is it about as consistent as my upload schedule. The amount of times I would fire multiple Rhino shots near an enemy for them to just go on living, that's what's illegal here. And it's not even good against bosses, because if the boss isn't on the ground, even direct hits will straight up miss. And even if they hit, they barely make a dent. It takes legit skill to make a world ender weapon feel this bad. At least we get some fun PlayStation Easter eggs. Always happy to see the family get together. What in green tarnation do you two want? You know, now that I think about it, the $70 price tag is just right for this game, because it perfectly represents what this game is. It's $70 because $70 is the tag given to all the new big Sony products, and that's what this is. A product. Despite ostensibly being a sequel to the main series, Rift Apart is absolutely a successor to the 2016 reboot, and I mean that in the most pejorative way possible. There is no point to Rift Apart in itself. The point is that this is a product meant to appeal to as many people as possible. The latest, shiniest new toy, and that's it. The only gameplay here is proven as part of the brand, either ours or the Sony patented model of long hallway while 2 NPCs crack wise. Everything else is unproven, so the player may not like it, so sure, skip it, whatever. The story has no substance and the characters no edge because having either of those things runs the risk of someone either not getting it or not liking it, and we want everyone to like us. We're both a sequel to the reboot and a sequel to the main series because people like both and we're hedging our bets. We reference Sly Cooper, a game no kid these days is going to recognize, only the parents and older fans who played during the PS2 days, only to rebuff those fans thinking back on those days because apparently they don't count anymore. Sly Cooper references while erasing our own PS2 era past. I don't think there's a better indictment of Rift Apart than that. But then again, what did I expect? It's like I called out in the beginning. This is what Ratchet & Clank is now. A generic, insecure, committee-driven lump of lard, desperate for your approval, with no character or personality unto itself. It's a jumping, jabbering husk of what it once was. The exact kind of vapid, glammed-up culture earlier games satirized. For all the different ways I've reworded that rebuke over the past several scripts, you'd think I'd be used to it by now. I guess, under everything, I've been holding on to hope. Into the Nexus proved you can turn around a bad situation with the right attitude. Allegedly going back to the old continuity, the long gap between last game and this one. I don't know, I guess I just thought there might be a chance Rift Apart could do something similar. But, yeah, so much for that. I feel the need to re-emphasize here, this is the perspective of a fan. My opinion is stemming from generations of intimate familiarity with these here hoodlums. If you're still fresh when it comes to this series, most of what I'm whining about probably won't even graze you. You have to understand, it's one thing for a series to start toothless, but it's another thing entirely to watch it pull out its teeth. And boy have I been watching. What's on its own is perfectly nominal and hardly offensive is so aggravating to me because I know the series can do better. I know where we started and I know how far we've sunk since. There's no heart. And is it really all my fault here for expecting anything? Insomniac clearly wants these to be associated with the other Ratchet & Clank games, and that comparison is simply unfavorable. You can't just rip off the bits you want to remember. Whether you like it or not, you get the whole thing, taking existing characters, worlds, dramas, themes, and stamp. It's not a different direction, it's a dimmer one. It's not the mediocrity that gets me, it's the aspiration to mediocrity. A game once anti-corporate, now the most corporate thing I've ever seen. If you're gonna bend an idea so far backwards you end up buried in the butt of its own jokes, what are you even still doing hanging around it? At this point, why not just make a new IP? Why keep dragging this one along? Outside of the obvious, it being a name people recognize. Honestly, it's hard to say if I'd have any interest at all in another Ratchet & Clank game. It would have to be, I think, an obvious side dish like Nexus, or even to an extent Deadlocked. But do you really think that could happen at this point? When Sony touts every AAA-backed exclusive as some 10-ton blockbuster? I mean, I guess never say never, but at this point it seems pretty safe to say we've passed that stop for good. Please, if you take anything away from this manic diatribe, don't let it be that, if you like the newer Ratchet & Clank games, you're wrong and stupid, regardless if you're a newcomer or not. I don't want to generalize and claim I speak for all Ratchet fans here. All I can do is speak for myself, and what myself is disappointed this is where we've ended up. And I know there have been reasons beyond Insomniac just not caring. Crunch, overextension, a whole terrible movie to work around, on top of obviously different creative teams taking command. But that doesn't change that we got what we got. And besides, those stories aren't accurate to every game equally, or in some cases even at all. The point stands. From almost the get-go, the Ratchet & Clank series has been on a steady decline, and by this point we've pretty much bottomed out. Everything that gave the games their unique sense of character is gone now, left to wither while we loudly and artlessly chase our next 15 minutes. It's not even that the series has turned sour in a quality sense, cause no, they're not bad games, even now. It's how bland they are, how little they're doing now compared to before, how many generations have passed and how graphics aside you might as well not be able to tell for all the nowhere we've gone with the formula. Not just the contentment with, but the aspiration to being totally average. There are a lot of games that can do what the reboot Rift Apart, even the future games do, and they can do it better. But maybe that's just me, the guy who's been here for all 20 years of this nonsense. I doubt most anything I've groused about here would so much as graze a new inductee, or someone who just dropped in for the one, or just an older fan who doesn't mind the stuff I do, and that's alright. The games I've whittled on here have their fans, and who am I to get between them and what they like? Against the rest of the PlayStation stable, honestly, it's nice to have a series with color in its cheeks, and one that can be enjoyed by a wider age range. Someone's gotta keep Astro Bot company, eh? Plus, in an era in which Sony barely nourishes the older vines, I do love that Ratchet's still relevant, and I love that there are new fans coming into the series to this day because of it. And I do understand welcoming those newbies carefully, and not dropping nearly 2 decades of history and commercially sold CBT on them. But it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. If you hit your emotional beats right, you can tell a story that newcomers can get into while still being meaningful to the OGs. You can go in different directions without disowning your past and where you've been. You can be something a younger audience can enjoy, But you don't have to be childish. This series could be doing all it's doing these days without selling out itself and its long-standing fans. And I don't mean to sound like, as a fan, I'm entitled to have anything done in certain ways, because I ain't. I just gotta stick up for my boys. Maybe it's not the newer games themselves that upset me, it's the idea of them and what they represent. There are more eyes on this series than ever, but at the cost of its heart. The emotions, the creativity, the thoughtfulness, the stuff that lasts once the controller's put down. Louder and newer doesn't always mean better. It's not a different direction to before, it's a dimmer one. Consider this whole exercise, if nothing else, my defense of the original Ratchet & Clank. It's a story that'll always have a special place in my heart, and I'll be a son of a quark before I let it be forgotten. It and everything it stood for. Now I know, we all gotta move on at some point. But as we go, we should be appreciating the road we came in on. What's worked, what hasn't, and how we can move forward, evolve, broach new boundaries. And the steps don't have to cross canyons or anything. A little can go a long way. Constantly doubling back to retread and brush over the ground covered before, all that'll do is leave you nowhere. You make your own dead end. Considering how Insomniac once let a series go quite cordially due to lack of meaningful ways to evolve or improve it, the bitter irony now is just too palpable. I know the universe has a certain sense of humor, but it still sucks to see something you love become the joke. But what sucks even more is that as much as I want to suggest, well, maybe next time it'll be better, deep down, I know I'd only be fooling myself. Fell for that one before, not falling for it again. Frankly, I'm over it. Perhaps it's time I get to bed. At least one of us should know when we've stayed up too long.